either live by the gun or you die by the sword.
Welcome to The Good, the Bad, and the Weird, where The Lord of the Rings is always on the menu. I'm Nicho.
I'm Chris.
I told you it was going to be the stupid intro.
I love it.
We are back for The Two Towers, Part 1.
Yes.
Yeah.
Arguably the most boring of the three.
Yeah. No, there is so much setup for this.
There is, and even the writers during the very delightful commentary were like, yeah, this one was hard, because, like, it's mostly just some fighting.
Yeah. Well, and on top of that, Jackson said it was the most difficult to adapt since it's really the middle of the story, and it's a lot of setup work compared to where the first one is setup work.
But you have, like, journey.
Yeah, exactly. And this one's just kind of like a scatter, like, filling in the pieces to leading up to everything.
And unlike our first one and then our third one, where we have a leaving of the parties and then a rejoining of the parties, nobody hangs out in this film.
No, not at all. And, I mean, Jackson knew that there were parts that he was going to have to sacrifice just to make a cohesive story.
Yeah.
And part of the reason this one is such a weird book, too, or weird at portion, is, one, Frodo and Sam's journey is just kind of there. It's not like, engaging. Like, this movie is less about Frodo and Sam, even though they still are kind of the focus of everything.
Yes. I will say, though, I do like how Peter Jackson and the writers went with this one, because this really helped solidify Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli for me.
Yes.
Especially Legolas and Gimli, because in the first movie, we really don't see a whole lot of them. They don't have a whole lot of lines. I think Legolas has a single line.
He's got a handful, but not many. They're few and far between.
They're pretty boring. This one not only, like, solidifies their dedication to the group, but also their relationship to each other, which for a lot of fans ends up being their favorite thing.
Yes, and especially like Gimli and Legolas. And I was rewatching it last night to get a refresher again, and that I realized, like, the way I treat people and, like, my friendships are very much the exact same way Legolas and Gimli talk to each other.
Yes.
But so the whole the reason The Two Towers is a weird book and weird portion of it is because it stems back from the original publication. Mm-hmm. Tolkien had written The Lord of the Rings as The Lord of the Rings. It was one giant book. But at the time, because I think there was some paper shortages, it was shortly after World War II-ish when he was starting to get this published. It was not cost effective to publish it in one giant volume, and so they had to split it up into 3 books.
And also, can you imagine the just colossal thud of a book that this sucker would have been if it was all in... Because, like, I have a version that is all 3 bound in one. I rarely read it because I have trouble holding the thing up.
No.
Like, it's too much.
It would basically be like a college textbook where, like, you don't casually read those. You actually have to set them down and study.
I think the only one I have that even comes close in thickness to it is all of the Narnia books combined into one book as well.
Oh, jeez.
Those 2 sit on my shelf and I'm like, those are beautiful. I never read them.
Yeah.
It's mostly there to be like someone gifted me this. I love those very much. I will continue to read the cheap, shitty paperback version that I got at Barnes & Noble when the movies came out, though.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of, like, I have some omnibus versions of manga, and some of them...
I do too, but, like, I almost feel like that's cheating, though, because the pages are thicker.
Yeah, and also, I mean, it's just... I mean, it's there's more visual on it than, like, I guess, text.
I have one that's, like, 4 pages of just one man's face.
Yeah.
There's nothing happening, it's just his face.
Yeah, but, yeah, I still like The Two Towers. I mean,
I do, too. I think what Jackson ended up doing with it works really well, especially because he's not only having to pace out this book into a movie, so he needs a beginning, middle, and end, but this is also the middle of a 3-part movie. Yeah. And so, yes, most people I don't think watch this by itself like how we did.
No.
but you could.
Yeah, it's weird.
I don't know. I feel like that was something that's not only like really smart in writing, but like the acting and character development works so nicely within this movie.
Yeah, no, they really did a good job of building it up, because I know in the past we've complained about what we've called setup movies.
Yes.
Where it's just a setup for like a potential sequel, but going into this knowing that it was one part of the middle of everything, and knowing that there was 100% going to be a conclusion, was good, because there's been quite a few live action adaptations of anime that do a good job, but they don't. They end on like a weird cliffhanger, because the second part never came specifically. Because I got a Dragon Takashimike as the God Wills and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 1.
Yeah.
Which, and again, that Part 1, and I think that's also very clever with the titling, where they didn't do The Lord of the Rings Part 1, The Fellowship of the Ring. It's just The Fellowship of the Ring.
Yes. And, it was very smart.
Yeah, instead of trying to make it into Part 1 and Part 2 like we've done.
Yes.
And so before we get into the movie, because we've covered all the intro stuff in our very first episode, what are we drinking this early in the morning, Chris?
It is very early in the morning to be drinking this. Well, we took inspiration from the delightful Man-Flesh Urukai group.
The Orc Draft, I think it's what's called.
Yeah, the slimy... I think they mentioned it was like a chocolate sauce.
No, I've got it down the line. Yeah. I wrote down what it is.
So we interpreted that as Jägermeister.
Yes. The most Middle-earth thing ever.
Unfortunately, truly is.
Cheers.
Cheers. Like licking a candle.
I don't know how I was able to drink like a whole pint of that once.
I have a lot of questions for you about that.
It was a very drunk night. And
I hope this wasn't what you started with.
No. Okay, this is what ended that night.
That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. And so the movie opens up with the fall of Gandalf fighting the Balrog. I
am a huge sucker for this scene, just like Peter Jackson is, because he's like, we weren't going to include this, and then I saw a D&D book that was inspired by Gandalf fighting the Balrog falling style, and then I was like, god damn it, that's so cool, I gotta include it, and I was like, yes!
Yeah, well, and here's the thing. For one, I think this is specifically where they started using a lot more CGI.
Yes.
But it's one of those things where it's still good, but it has aged.
It has. Especially on our TV, because ours does the stupid thing where it fills in scenes.
Oh, right. You've...
I don't know how to permanently turn it off. I'm sure there's a way. I can't figure it out.
Yeah, and mine's currently in 1080i.
I'm gonna start looking for just a giant tube TV to replace this sucker when it dies.
Hey, you got the space now.
I do have the space. But, so like... I could see where it still looked good.
Yeah.
But because a lot of our TVs, which, let's be real, that's how everyone's watching this now, is on home theater.
Yeah.
You can still occasionally go to theater and see this, because, like, it's a really popular rerun, it's a popular summer evening flick, I've definitely seen it at the pool a couple times.
Yeah.
But if you're watching it on your home TV, there's some spots where you're like, ooh, a little crusty.
Yeah. But even then, it is still such a... It's such a big leap from like something like Tron.
Oh yeah.
Or anything else of that time, like fully CG, like even going back to like some of the old Star Wars movies.
Yes.
And Lord of the Rings still holds up quite a bit better, because this came out around the same time I think The Phantom Menace had come out.
Yes.
And Attack of the Clones.
And honestly, yes, there are some parts that I was like, okay, we've gotten a little crunchy, but even if I was watching this for the first time ever, didn't have the like reminiscent goggles on, it still does look pretty good for a fully CGI scene.
Mm-hmm.
Like
CGI with Sir Ian McKellen.
Sir Ian McKellen's face delightfully plastered on.
Yes.
Yes.
But and I think that's the thing, is because it's so epic, we can look past that.
I also think it helps that, like, we have a couple of scenes that are, like, close up with fighting, but most of this is zoomed out, and that helps a lot.
Yes.
Because it's a lot easier to forgive distance, I think.
Yeah. No, and what was it? I don't think Brian was there for that night, but we rewatched Reign of Fire,
Mm-hmm.
and I know he hates that.
He does.
But it's that era where, like, they did some really, really good CGI work,
Yes.
and, like, it kind of gets forgot about in the grand scheme of everything.
Yeah, and
But
I think the other reason why this works is because there is not a great interpretation of the Balrog
no.
ever. So they already did their best to set him up in the first movie. And, like, let's be real, nobody watched this by itself. You've at least seen the first one once. So you have that remembrance of it coming out into the hall, the smoke wings, like, you have that already built in your head.
It just made me think of for our finish that quote.
Yes.
I have no memory of this place.
Yes.
Sugi's responded, I have no memory of this scene.
Yes,
and my thought
accurate.
immediately was like, you might have seen the theatrical version, but a lot of people haven't seen the extended, and so it's like, I don't remember the scene. And it's like, oh right, it's the extended one.
Because you've never seen the scene, but at the same time, you might have.
Yeah,
it's hard to remember.
I mean, it all. There's parts where I thought it was in Return of the King. It's like, nope, that's Two Towers still.
This one.
But I think that's a credit just to, even though there is a beginning and end to each one of these movies, they all flow so well together.
Really do.
It's not like
it's one of the few series that you truly don't want to just watch the one.
Yeah, and I think part of it too is because they do continue so closely back to back. They don't do any of the weird like time skips. Like I'm reading Goodnight Pun Pun.
Yes.
And between every volume, there's like a 2 to 4 year time skip or something.
And then something else that the directors and writers made a huge fight for, which I think helps a lot, is we had at the beginning that flashback intro of, you know, oh, I can taste it in the soil.
Yeah.
Woman's out here licking ground to taste the future that she forgot about.
Yeah.
And at first, the studio was really against that. And then it worked out so well. They're like, you need that in the second one. They're like, no.
Yeah.
No, we don't want that in the second one. We're going to have beautiful flying shots, but we understand that this is going to be something that everyone watches collectively.
Yeah.
Which helps a lot because you're immediately thrown right into it.
Well, and specifically on that line is, New Line was the one who wanted a prologue of the prologue,
Yes.
a condensing of the first movie, and Jackson was like, if you haven't seen the first one, you're not going to see the second one.
No, and he's completely right, which is why I think this is one of, if not the only, like, large, heavy hitter trilogy of a movie that you truly want to sit down and watch all three at once.
Yeah. No.
Even the extended edition, like, nobody sits down and is like, no, let's only watch the second one.
Yeah.
Like, I'll watch any of the Star Wars. Granted, I prefer to watch them all together, but, like, if I don't have a full day to do it, yeah, I'll pick one.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that lends itself to that, I mean, we Lord of the Rings, because it's based off a book and it wasn't an original creation,
Yes.
whereas, like, the first Star Wars movie was very much a standalone movie, and if it wasn't successful, it was a one-off,
Yeah.
and it was done.
And, like, they have the books, but you could argue the books and the movies are really just kind of their own separate entities.
And the books came after the movie and everything,
Yeah.
So, I mean,
and even the Harry Potter series, like, I'll happily just watch the third one.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have to watch all 7 or 8, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's a testament to Harry Potter as well, because each movie in itself is a standalone movie.
Yeah.
Or Lord of the Rings, while they do stand alone,
You really gotta watch them all together.
Yeah, they're so well edited and paced.
Yes.
But and that's partly also because Jackson wanted to start off with something familiar, foreshadowing Gandalf's return, because lo and behold, this epic fight was potentially just all a dream for Frodo.
Yeah, I also appreciate how Jackson chose to make the fight with Gandalf purposefully as vague as possible. Because it is fairly vague in the book. It explains, I think, better, like, the lore in the book. But in the movie, you don't really need lore. We've already pulled out a lot of the, like, old lore.
Yeah.
So for it to just be kind of like, well, he's falling, and he's still falling? Is this the middle of the earth? I don't know. Yeah, is he dead? Maybe.
It's
I don't know.
somewhere.
Yeah.
To the depths.
To the depths. Is this heaven? Maybe.
And up the long stairs. Which, so the peak he's fighting on,
yes.
To even get to there, you actually have to go to the very, very bottom of the mine.
Yes.
And climb all those stairs all the way to the
And
top.
they thought about doing the stairs, and then they were like, we'd have to model all the stairs.
No.
No, we're done. We're done modeling shit.
Yeah.
Because they modeled a lot for this movie.
Yeah.
More than you could argue for the first movie.
Well, and part of that, so part of the framing and everything comes from the editing process.
Mm-hmm.
Because they shot everything, and then they cut and edited it one story at a time, and then used pickup shots for refining Gollum more.
Yes. The crew has mentioned that there's somewhere out there like a multi-day cut of the movies that Jackson just is like, well, maybe someday if I'm bored, I'll just throw it all together. Yeah.
And I mean, he talks about throughout even the commentaries while he was filming the movie, stating that, hey, there was potentially some other stuff. We might do a 25-year release when that comes around.
I love how throughout the entirety of, like, because when they did the commentary, they hadn't even released the third one yet for this movie. Like, they did this stuff fast. Mm-hmm. And even during then, he's like, yeah, I've got so much stuff, we could just do a TV show. Yeah. Like, this could just, that character in the background right there, he's for a TV show later on. And they're like, no, he's not. No, he's not. Guess what's happening?
He's dead.
He's dead.
And so we also get our title card, which
is beautiful as always.
They wanted to do a little bit of a deviation from what they did in the first one,
but I think it still is reminiscent. Yeah, like you wouldn't sit there and be like, yeah, the second one was real different. Mm-hmm. No, it just kind of flows together. Like you're like, oh yeah, this one is called Two Towers, right? That's what this one's called. Yeah, exactly.
And from here, with that epic intro and everything,
it's beautiful.
We cut to Frodo and Sam crossing rocks.
Yeah, we have fully leaned into what I call the era of bitching Frodo. Yeah. Where Frodo just from here on out just kind of bitches his way through Middle-earth. And Samwise really becomes the true main character that he was meant to be.
He's very much becoming Bilbo.
He is.
Yeah, he is just a bit.
He's turning into Bilbo, but not in the like, oh, the ring is possessing him sort of way. No, the man forgot his hanky and is upset.
No, I gotta disagree with that.
I mean, yes, the ring is also a huge part of it. But the reason I say he's lost his hanky and is upset about it is Sam is the smart one who took a lot of Bilbo's advice to heart. He's brought seasoning and salt from the Shire. Yeah. He hangs onto the comfortable things. Man walks around with a kettle on his back just in case they have time for tea. Yeah. You know, maybe.
Yeah, I can see it.
Whereas Frodo's over here with like, well, I have my bottle of light, I've got my nightlight, and my cloak, and my sadness.
Yeah. Well, and I think, because we don't really see it till later on, and I wish they had done something a little bit more with it, but the chain does, like, the ring does, like, physically pull down on the chain and is...
And I like how they tried to emphasize that by having, like, these... Like, when you see the ring, it is full on the screen. Like, it's not like in the corner of your eye, you're getting a glimpse of, like, if they're focused on the ring, it is the whole thing. Yeah. Which I do think helps add, like, a weightiness to it. It makes it much more imposing than I think it otherwise would be. But, yeah, I do kind of wish that there had been a little bit more emphasis on, like, the physical aspect. Yeah. But I also don't care, because we now get one of the best characters to ever be CGI'd into the film.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more before we get to Gollum. Yes. Because I'm just sitting here talking about this. The reason this opening scene is important, even though it's kind of gray and dull, is because we have to reestablish Frodo and Samwise since they're splitting. And their new dynamic, because before Sam just was kind of like a puppy Labrador following him.
Adorable, yes. And he is now turned into a Girl Scout mother.
Yeah. But they mention in the special features that Frodo and Samwise's relationship is that of an officer and a Batman, also known as an orderly. And I think it's something that's compelling about Lord of the Rings is that even though there are a lot of parallels between wars and the military, what makes it more than just, and I know it's not an allegorical story by Tolkien's account, but it's because it's about war but not about war at the same time. Yes. But Yeah. Also, these mountain shots were just a few cliffs that were rearranged to make the area feel bigger, and
Yes, and they got lucky. All that smoke, all that fog, just happened to show up, and they were like, "Quick, film!"
yeah. Well, okay, so that's part of when they actually had shots, but on the close-ups, they're
Yes.
on stages.
Yes,
That were just like 6 sets of rocks that they could rearrange,
and you know what? It looks great.
yeah, which honestly is a better strategy than just changing the color of the hallways as a Deep Blue Sea 2.
Deep Blue Sea 2.
But and I mean there's some cute moments. The
Yeah.
magic rope from Galadriel and the falling like 2 feet is like, oh, I can't see the bottom.
Yeah, there's a nice balance in this movie of humor.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue the first one's humor is almost lacking. It's so much setup, and
Yeah.
we really kind of start to like open up into Peter Jackson's humor with the story in
Yeah.
this movie, which I like a lot because that's, I think, what most people remember.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people's fondness for the first movie, but they add all of the character development from the second and third movie, especially the second film.
Yeah. Well, and so rewatching these, there are some moments, and more so when we get to Return of the King,
Yes.
where the comedy just doesn't hit as well because the movies got more serious. It's kind of like how the Harry Potter movies, the first 2 or 3 have like their little bit of comedic bits to them,
Mhm.
but then they actually started getting more serious
Yes.
as the characters matured. I think Peter Jackson lost it just a little bit. Not saying that it's horrible, it's just I
Yeah.
can see people's complaints initially of like, you put too much humor into it.
I can see what they mean.
Yeah. But also, one of my favorite little bits in the special features was the design team talking about how they had to do all these like little details and stuff into like the leaves of the lumbus bread,
Yes.
and that no one pays attention to.
Nobody's noticed.
But if they got it wrong, you would notice.
Exactly.
And I think that just reiterates the care
Oh,
that was really put into these movies.
yes, definitely.
Yeah. And so now that we've established Frodo and Samwise, Gollum hunts in the night.
I specifically have always loved Gollum as like
Mhm.
a character design. I originally fell in love with the old animated Gollum who looked like a frogman.
Yeah.
Because like he's ugly and charming and like looks like a little toad. This Gollum though, you can like the design of him, you can see
Yes.
the evolution of him. You can see like when they say like he was kind of a hobbit once. You're like, yes, he was.
Yeah.
Yes, he was. You're somehow drawn to him, even though he is the nastiest fucking thing to ever crawl across this Middle Earth.
Yes.
But he's also nasty in that, like, ugly old chihuahua where, like, you got no teeth, eyes are kind of falling out of its head, it smells like poop all the time.
I've met Gus.
Yeah.
Gus was over here once.
Yes. Where you're like, okay, this is a creature that is terrible and ugly, but I love him.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think part of it is just like the framing of his entrance where he's
Yes.
very
He's almost bug-esque.
yeah, bug, and like just the way he almost crawls down an almost completely vertical
Yes.
cliff.
He's almost inhuman.
Yeah, vertical's the right term.
Yes.
I was blanking on what's vertical, it's horizontal.
It's okay. I do this all the
It's a
time.
bit early.
And I think part of the reason why he works so much better than
Mhm.
any of the previous Golems is two-part. A, it is the animation design with his face. They
Yeah.
took the time to pick real emotions,
Mm-hmm.
have universal emotions, so it wasn't just like, oh, we're pulling it off of this one person. Like, they used the actor's face as a base, but
Yep.
then they really added on to it. But the other reason why I think he works so much better than any previous version is because they bothered to film in the suit on location.
Yes.
And so even though, yes, the CGI has aged a little bit, and he does... There's a couple, especially in the daylight scenes, where you're like, yeah, okay, he looks a little odd.
Yeah, the coloring's a little off.
And they
like,
had mentioned that, like, full sun, it was really hard to get the stupid skin right.
Yep.
Like, he's very transparent.
well, yeah, and
But even then, because he is physically there, because he is physically moving, like, when he moves the blanket, like,
Yeah.
that's not something they added. Like, that is the actor actively doing that, and he threw himself into being Gollum.
Well, and so while we're talking about that, Gollum is portrayed by Andy Serkis.
Who you know, you just don't know you know.
Yeah, and apparently he got the voicing of Gollum and his Gollum,
Mm-hmm.
from his cats and their hairballs.
Which is the perfect description.
Yes. And also...
Gollum is, in fact, a hairless cat.
Yeah, and here's the thing with, yeah, feed me, because that's the other thing, he's constantly talking about food and,
Yes.
like, his...
And he brings them dead things.
Yeah, well... yeah. Yeah, you're right.
Gollum's just a hairless manged cat.
Well, and also I think that shows like kind of his orcish and like his the darkness encompassing him, where like he has an aversion to elvish items.
Yes.
But also, here's some interesting things about Gollum or about the character and Andy Serkis, because I do want to mainly talk about that part.
Yes.
He thought that Gollum was going to be boring based off the book, him reading the books, and then he started like really thinking about it and got there.
Yes.
But Fran Walsh was the one who took control of editing Gollum's character to make him more complex. And more complex rather than just being like, okay, here's your new shitty Gandalf.
Yes.
To guide you. And also not just be like a warning to, hey Frodo, this is what you could become.
Yeah, which is what he was in the like previous versions of the movie.
And in this one he was sculpted and designed based off Alan Lee, one of the artists, with a little bit of Iggy Pop, and they used a reference of like 200 drawings, 100 marquees, all done before they even finalized.
Yes.
And put him into the computer by Weta. His skin was supposed to be salamander-like and axolotl, to make him feel sickly and underground.
Yes, because I mean, he did spend a very long time in a mountain cave.
Yeah, and with little happy accidents, he's missing a chunk of his ear lobe.
Yep.
That was an accident from an air bubble in the silicone mold, and Jackson saw it, and he's like, huh, good job, guys.
I like it.
Like, didn't even second guess. They're like, oh, it's like in games where it's like, where people find like some shitty glitch, but they love it.
Yes.
It's like, well,
and it's perfect.
It's a feature now.
It is a feature.
But it's also, the reason I do want to talk about the design of Gollum is there was a lot of trust put into Weta to, well, first off, New Line didn't think Weta could do it.
Which, back in the day, I can kind of understand. Like, this is a huge project for them.
Yeah. Which, it's impressive now to realize, like, just the eyes in Battle Angel Alita have more controls and polygons than all of the model of Gollum.
Yeah.
But we also have to kind of look back to, like, the first photorealistic CGI character only came out about 17 years before this in 1985 with young Sherlock Holmes.
Yep.
And really, we'd only seen Star Wars Episode 1 at the peak in 1999.
And even when that came out, people bitched about it.
Yeah, exactly. So, framing it for what it was, like...
And the fact that they... Like, I can understand all of the hesitancy with having a full CGI character in a very realistic so far movie. Like, even the dwarfs have been incredibly realistic. Like, we didn't really CGI a whole lot onto the elves either. Like, I can understand the hesitancy, but the impressive thing is now this is the Gollum people think of. Yeah, like, and all the other ones have been forgone. Well,
and also to give perspective, when Lord of the Rings came out, we had what was considered like the high. Not Star Wars wasn't even considered like the peak of special effects. At that time, two other movies stand out quite a bit more. And because I wanted to tie it back into one of my favorite game series, Final Fantasy: The Spirit Within had come out in 2001, as well as Shrek.
Yes.
Those stand out as better CGI than Star Wars.
Yes. And, I mean, yeah, they did. And they still, I mean, they still are good. But then you get Gollum.
Yeah. No.
For all of the movie.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a bit of framing of like
what the bar was at.
Yeah, we were at the cusp of CGI getting good.
Yes, and you could argue that this is still good CGI.
Yeah, no,
which is crazy impressive to me.
Yeah, I'm not trying to shit on it. I'm just saying, like,
yeah,
it is.
They didn't just step over the bar; they leaped over it.
Yeah, but also my other favorite part of Andy Serkis and his portrayal is he wasn't really explained to the cast before he showed up.
No, he was not.
And he just showed up in what I think they called it the gimp suit.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did.
But, and like you mentioned, because he was physically there, what they did is they took a shot with him, and then they took a clean pass without him, and they always said his shots were always better because...
he was there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it is, and like, it is one of those things that as movies age, it's so easy to tell when, like, example, Dobby is just a foam head on a stick.
Yes.
Like, yeah, the CG for Dobby does look good, but the acting between, especially the young actors, and the foam head on a stick isn't as good as watching a full-grown man in a gimp suit slide down a mountain river in the middle of winter. Yeah,
well, and so also in regards to that is, it's not just CGI'd. They tried to use a type of Roto Animation, and to give some perspective, what Roto Animation is, think of old Disney, where like they took someone actually dancing in a dress
and then just traced it.
Exactly. Yeah. So they did that, and it's weird because Circus isn't Gollum shaped at all.
No, but he is.
Yeah, he is.
He's one of those like caricature actors that like, even though you're like, yeah, no, nobody actually looks like Gollum. When you see him in the suit, like being Gollum, fighting Sam and Frodo, catching fish, you're like, yeah, that man is Gollum. Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. 100%.
Yeah, no, because I think there were some pickup shots they had to do later on. And Circus just did, like, Peter Jackson had a handheld camera, and they just did it in, like, his foyer in England. And they show the footage, and it's like, well...
yeah.
If I didn't know this was for a movie, this is kind of weird.
This is a little strange, guys.
Yeah. But also, I do like when they're setting up Gollum in this, because really before, we haven't seen him at all.
No, we've gotten glimpses, which is good because they changed his character model.
Yes. But it's also this part for Frodo of like seeing is believing, where he's like, at the very start of the Fellowship of the Ring, he says something along the lines of, I wish, or no, it's when they're in the mines, when he says, I wish Bilbo had killed him when he had the chance, and Gandalf is like, yeah, you will, if you meet him, you'll feel bad for him. Yeah. Because Gollum, and we don't know this yet, if you're going into this brand new, Gollum is such a tragic character.
The poor guy, but also like, yeah, kill him.
Yeah,
put him out of his misery, goddammit.
Just a little bit, but like...
But at the same time, like that chihuahua that's way too fucking old for its own good, you want him to keep chugging.
Yeah, yeah. But I also like that we're really building the dynamic of this new trio of characters, this new trio's dynamic, because Gollum is very tricky to begin with. Yes. Because we know he's sneaky, and then we have that part where, like, he's like, I think this is the part where they had to do the pickup shot, where he turns around and screams at them. Yes. Yeah, and then runs off. No, it was the cave scene, I think, was the one of the ones.
Either way.
But, yeah.
Well, and we also, we haven't gotten to actually seeing Peter Jackson's version of The Hobbit yet, but we've already gotten whispers of, like, this is Bilbo's creature. Yeah. The one that he fought riddles with in the cave. Yeah. That's what he chose to fight him with.
Well,
and so we know he's tricksy.
Well, I think it depends where... Well, okay. I'm going to take a quick step back. So, when I saw this, and going back to how Peter Jackson set this up for people who hadn't seen the movie, or had no Lord of the Rings experience before, this is their way of showing really who Gollum is. Yes. Because if you haven't seen the old Hobbit animated, you have no clue of what the hell this creature is, other than it's mentioned a couple times in the Fellowship.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. He's some humanoid creature hunting them.
Yes. And this is such a good setup for him, because from the beginning, he is a true threat. But at the same time, maybe he is useful.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he's the new shitty Gandalf.
He is the new shitty Gandalf.
Yeah.
Until we get new shitty Gandalf.
You know what he is? He is, he's what's left of Voldemort's humanity in Harry Potter. He looks a lot like that.
Oh, poor dead Voldemort.
Yeah. But from here, we cut to the orcs, or the Uruk-hai meeting the orcs.
Yes. Which is such a smart, like, this is some of my favorite character designing.
Mm-hmm.
Because theoretically, they should look the same.
No.
But they don't. Because how do we make them both terrifying, both of the same, like, variety, but make it so that on screen it is clear who's who?
Well, okay.
Without, like, giving them a banner.
So, yes, that is very good design, but they are not the same.
I know.
To give a little, to refresh everyone's lore, orcs are corrupted elves.
Yes.
Uruk-hai are made specifically by Saruman, and they're a fusion between orcs, goblins, and men.
Yes.
So, no explanation of how that happens.
No, well, mud pit birth. Poke it with a stick.
Yeah, but how do you combine those three? Do you
put them in a mud pit and stir it with a stick?
Okay.
I don't know.
Well, we'll take it that. But this starts... There's so much inner fighting in Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
That this is also important to establish that even there's inner fighting within the bad guys. Like, there's no real peace. The only peace we've actually seen is Hobbiton.
Yeah, it is truly the only peaceful place on Middle-earth.
Yeah, where the biggest issues are the Saxville Bagginses once...
being shitty.
Yeah, want Bag End. And Bilbo's kind of being a dickhead.
He's actually being... Yeah.
Yeah, that's the only piece we have left in this world.
Yes.
And I get why they're trying to protect it. It's like the fucking Holy Grail. Well, it's not the Holy Grail. It's the Holy Grail for the hobbits.
Yes.
Yeah. But it starts establishing that Pippin's taking everything a bit more seriously now, as Merry's not doing so hot, as he's like, get him some water, and that's where you get the orc drought.
Yum.
Which, not like Jaeger at all. It was peach juice and cola syrup.
Yum.
Yeah.
Delicious.
Sticky and sweet.
Yes. But this whole scene really is some smart, like, film setting. Because it stacks up that, like, we are truly getting into some desperate times here. Like, Merry and Pippin have always, like, seen themselves as luggage. And now they are not just luggage, they are burden luggage that someone has to come get. Yeah.
Well, and that gets even, that gets emphasized again later on.
Yeah.
Especially with how the orcs and the Uruk-hai are seeing hobbits.
Yeah. They're literally being hauled across Middle-earth.
Yeah. And for most of the montages in the movie, the Uruk-hai are outtakes and re-edits from the first movie.
Yeah.
So
it works out.
Yeah, save money where you can.
Yeah. I mean, they didn't save a ton of money, but, some.
No, not at all. But also of note, the guy who played the man-flesh Uruk-hai.
Which is how he is credited. I love it.
What's Sala. His name? Sala?
Sala Barker.
Yeah,
Baker?
Sala Baker.
Yeah,
Baker.
He
is a Maori dude who he also played the bad orc in the last movie, who I can't remember that character's name.
Other orc.
the big orc with the big white hand on his face.
The fighting one, Yeah. You know the one.
And he also plays more bad guys later on. He just has like the perfect role for it.
He does.
He's a big dude too.
He is a big dude, and he also like managed to bring quite a lot to the like Uruk-hai like mindset. Because him and then several others who would play the Uruk-hais would go along and be like, this is a group of like some rowdy ass bunch. They're a bunch of like stompy feet, throwing shit, twisty group. And so they'd add things like pounding spears, standing in certain like groups, like having these little bickers between themselves. And Peter Jackson was like, you know what? This is good.
Yeah, it's a weird thing of life art imitating life.
Yes.
And they did it so well, and it doesn't feel out of place.
No, it feels like if they hadn't, it would have felt more CGI-y.
Yeah.
But because they've added these little, like, humanistic quirks to the Uruk-hai, like, they feel like a proper, like, army.
Yeah, and it's not... It kind of stems back in my thought to how we have those, like, very bad fantasy movies.
Yes.
Where people talk like, oh, we must go over there to save the princess.
And all the bad guys are just the same guy over and over
Yeah,
again.
and it's just so stiff. I think, what was it? Beastmaster.
Yeah.
One of the Beastmasters we were watching.
You mean all of the Beastmasters?
Yeah. But, and I like, this is why I like seeing so much of the behind the scenes stuff, just to see how organically all these like little bits of detail got added. Because from here, we cut back to, we're reestablishing the other trio of Gimli, Aragorn, and Legolas on the hunt.
Let's be real, the only trio we care about.
Yeah, which beautiful establishing shot of
I love
them running. And
just some cross-country shit.
And as I love that Gimli is always just slightly behind.
I do too. He's always winded.
Because you know that they are holding back as much as they can from running
yes. Well,
full sprint.
Because obviously, and in the books, Legolas and Aragorn went around together for a while doing ranger shit.
Yeah.
Poor Gimli. Gimli is not meant for long distances.
Even he says, we're sprinters. We're natural sprinters.
Same.
I'm opposite. I
was also a distance kid.
Yeah.
I was very slow, but persistent.
I was on the lower end of competitive. Not fast, but not super slow.
I was fast enough to be forced into competitive, but I am so uncompetitive, it drove everyone around me crazy.
Same. But this also is I think there's a few lines before this, but it's the one that we all know from the early meme days of YouTube.
Oh, I love this line so much.
Legolas looks with his special eyes.
Special anime eyes.
They're taking the hobbits to Isengard.
And thus was born the greatest song ever written.
Your husband vehemently hates that fucking song.
Do you know why? Because I found a 10-hour version of it.
I know. And you listened to it for quite a bit, and he got real pissed.
Mostly because I have the ability to listen to the same song for like a whole day and not realize I've listened to only one song. And so when it puts on a 10-hour play of like one song, I don't realize it until like 2 or 3 hours into the hobbits are going to Isengard.
It is fun finding... Well, yeah, I do that too with like the Harvest Moon soundtracks and whatnot. But I love finding these little things, because I did this completely by accident, because I know... Yeah, that's what it was. I showed up to your guys' house for, I think, our planning session. And I'm like, hey, Brian... Or, no, I just pulled it up or something, and he's like, God damn it, this song again? And I'm like, this is me having no history of him hating this song.
Listen to this song too much, I apologize to no one.
No, it's a fun song. If you haven't heard it, look it up.
Hell, you can't miss it.
I might share the link later or something.
It's so good.
And we, from here, we cut to the orcs hatching again, which is grody.
I love it, though.
Yeah. And
it's the perfect amount of, like, dirty slime.
Yeah, and we get the betrayal of the wild men. And I say betrayal in air quotes.
Yes. They are so betrayed. No one saw this coming.
Also known as the Dunlendings.
Dunland.
But, so, here's the thing. They are...
Yes? Can I help you? It's 9 o'clock, Charlie. It's not dinner time.
You've had your breakfast too. But so a little bit of Lord of the Rings history. The Dunlendings are actually justified in their quote unquote betrayal.
Yes.
The Rohirrim did drive them from their lands.
Yeah, I mean especially the Two Towers. Especially the Two Towers. It is impossible to fully get all of the political bullshit that Tolkien originally wrote, because that's part of the joy of Lord of the Rings is it's not like most fantasies where it's kind of got an overview. Yeah, maybe we've added a little spice here or there. No, everybody on this entire Middle Earth has beef with somebody else. Yeah. Everyone has bullshit happening. Everything is so realistically complex. And that's the thing. And I feel like we did a good job of adding it to the movie without, like, emphasizing it. Yeah,
I think that's how, like, because it's so well done, and going back to the most recent, I will say, realistic fantasy we had with Game of Thrones.
Yes.
Granted, I haven't seen the last 2 seasons.
Don't worry about it.
I know.
You know what happens. That's all that matters.
But I think what happened was... Lord of the Rings is complex, but it's not overly complex.
It's not unnecessarily complex.
Yeah. Which, as much as I love complexity, Game of Thrones did get too complex and a little too much.
And I think part of the reason for that was Game of Thrones sat in the throne room around the bickering and the problems, whereas Lord of the Rings, in both the book and the movie form, especially the movie form, all of those same problems happen, but we're not there to witness them.
Yeah, exactly.
You just know that they happened. Which is, I think, the brilliance of it, because, you can't be involved in every problem.
Yeah.
It's just not possible.
No, and we're getting establishment that not all men are good, because the only betrayal we've seen is Boromir, really.
Which, honestly, this finally solidifies, in your mind, truly, that the only group of people walking Middle-earth, including the gross, slimy creatures from Mordor, who haven't caused some bullshit, is the hobbits. Yeah. And you could argue the hobbits cause bullshit amongst themselves, but it's low-level bullshit.
Well, hobbits have caused bullshit.
They have.
They've kind of been a little bit more oblivious to it, or willfully oblivious, because the Rangers exist solely
to contain the hobbit bullshit.
Yeah, because it's oh, look at these little creatures. Look at them.
They invented golf. How cute.
But we do get the burning of Fangorn.
Yes, poor trees.
And this is where we actually really get Saruman building up his army.
Yes.
He's making alliances, and the wild men attack a village. And I do want to talk about this part a little bit. The village was cleverly a bunch of fishing huts that they just covered up.
They look great.
Yeah, they did a good job with it. But they also pulled from John Ford Westerns with their shots of the savages attacking.
Yeah.
And again, savages in quotes.
Specifically the movie ones.
Yeah, old-timey reference or...
Old-timey Western reference.
Yeah, wording for non-white people.
Which could be even more specific white people.
Yeah. And while we don't see much of them, the outfits are designed around oceanic cultures, and they use natural materials and everything, which also has ties to a little bit of history that I know of, but I didn't do too much digging, because there was a point where it wasn't Vikings. There was some oceanic people that decimated the civilized world at the time, and no one knows exactly why or how they appeared in history. They just happened.
For funsies.
Yeah. Also, a good chunk of the wild men were local bikers that the crew had met.
And you know what? If you're going to be in a film, might as well.
Yeah. And they said they just brought a level
chaos.
Of chaos and energy that the wild men needed.
Yeah, and most extras, it's easy to be hey, I need you to bully up some people. It's a lot easier to tell a gang of bikers, hey, I need you to bully up a town.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do like these parts because, honestly, yeah, Gollum's creepy. Yeah, the orcs are fighting. But this is really the building of putting the gears of war in motion.
Yes. This is proper, trauma from war.
Yeah.
And it's not one creature being terrible.
Yeah, it's also establishing that we're not going through a fun fantasy romp that the Fellowship was anymore.
No.
We're
This
we're
is
dealing
real
with
people's
real
lives.
shit, yeah.
And not just oh, look at the mass people in the distance. Oh, shit, children.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no, not children.
Yeah, and that's just the thing, is we're... In a real, and we've come again bitching about setup movies.
Mm-hmm.
In a relatively short time, we've been introduced to Gollum, the orcs, the hunting trio, Saruman expanding his power, and the basics of the Rohan people and their warrings with the wild men.
Yeah,
we haven't even seen Rohan yet.
Nope.
And we are in Rohan. We haven't seen.
We haven't seen any cities.
Yeah, I have the name of the town. I can't remember because I've always referred to
it as Rohan.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, me too.
It's not Rohan.
It's close enough.
Yeah, because from here, we cut to a hunting party finding a bunch of dead men and horses.
Whoops!
And,
oh no, is that the king's son?
Yeah.
Oh, he's dead. Oh.
And very quickly, we're introduced to Eowyn, who is portrayed by Miranda Otto. Eomer, who's portrayed by Carl Urban, who a lot of people know from The Boys, and I think he was in Doom.
Yes.
Yeah, he was in Doom. I always forget he was in Doom.
It's okay.
And also we are introduced to the King of Rohan, Theoden.
And some of the best makeup in this movie.
Yeah. Portrayed by Bernard Hill, who is fantabulous. And also Grima Wormtongue, who...
Oh, so good.
Portrayed by Brad Dourif, who was in Dune as well, which I didn't realize until I was watching it with the lads, and Philip has the best face for like recognizing, or best eyes for recognizing just random actors. Because I pulled up last Saturday, I pulled up a trailer for Tokyo Zombie.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Oh, I know that guy. What have I seen him in?" And so we go through this list of like, "Oh shit, you've seen him in a lot. He was in Gozu."
Yes.
And Ichi the Killer.
And the fact that Phil remembers that is impressive since he watched it through his phone.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean it's I just love how we're just establishing Rohan.
Yes.
We get this dark foreshadowing that the kingdom's rotting within.
Yes.
Like the
whole thing is just like crumbling away.
Yeah. Later on, I think there's a part where Eowyn goes out and one of the banisters is flying away, breaks away, and it's just like...
And that was not CGI. It was fucking windy.
Yeah.
To the point where Peter Jackson was like, "Yeah, we were out there, and it took my sunglasses, and I watched them float away."
Yeah.
And I said goodbye, sunglasses.
And I'll get into that in a little bit, because we really haven't seen full Rohan yet.
No.
But we also, like, talking color palette and tones, like...
It is a beautiful Kansas in the middle of winter brown.
Yeah, the movies get darker and more dulled instead of like the, again, bright cheery colors of the first movie.
And I like how they pick dull for specifically the Two Towers, because it moves from bright springtime colors. Mm-hmm. We're now in like dead winter colors, where it's like, okay, it's bright out, but like everything's brown.
Yeah.
It's not gray, it's brown.
Exactly.
It's dirty, it's dusty, it's dry. Mm-hmm. It almost feels cold the whole time without feeling like blue toned.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas once we get to the third film, we move into that gray and black color palette undertones.
Yeah, well, and also the last movie has the biggest contrasts in color, where we really have a black and white.
Yes,
facing
we literally
each other.
have a chessboard against each other.
Yeah. Also, side little note, Carl Urban was chosen to have a Kiwi in a lead role.
Yes, he was.
Actually, now that I think about it, I don't know if Kiwi's offensive or not.
It is. You should not call them.
Okay. I think they specifically said to have a Kiwi in the role. So
I think it is similar to Hillbilly. If you are one, you can call yourself that.
Okay. Interesting. I'll look it up.
Okay.
But from here, we cut back to the hunting trio that's on the trail of the orcs and the Uruk-hai, and they've decided to have a little bit of a rest.
Mostly because Gimli looks like he's gonna die.
Yeah.
Poor Gimli.
Well, and so, I forgot to write down, in this part, they also mentioned that Gimli has a fuck ton of axes on him.
Yes.
Because he's got throwing axes, he's got his battle axe, he's got his walking axe.
Yes.
He's got an axe for everything.
He's got an axe for everything, which is hilarious because he's not even the most armed out of the group.
No, not at all. But this part where the orcs and the Uruk-hai are resting is probably one of the most memorable parts for me as a kid.
Yes. It was both, like, you couldn't look away, but it was terrifying.
Yeah. So, design-wise, they had to have, actually, kind of fitting, we're having a licorice drink, they had a licorice, like, mouthwash that they used because they wanted to remove any trace of, like, warm colors from them.
Yep.
And also, they wanted it to appear like they were rotting from the inside.
Very, very slimy.
Yeah, because the orcs don't actually change in color,
no.
But the Uruk-hai do.
Yeah.
Because they're unnatural, and even though they're out in the sun, they're still not supposed to really be in the sun, so they get darker and more corpse-like as the
almost
movies go
burnt.
on. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. Roasting.
But we also get one of the other memeable lines. Meat's back on the menu, boys.
And then we just annihilate this corpse. There is bits of organ flying everywhere. I loved this scene as a kid.
Well, and also it was because they couldn't actually show blood, otherwise it would get a hard R rating.
Yeah, and they didn't want that. So instead we throw some intestine.
Yeah. But this also implies that orcs are cannibalistic.
Which, let's not lie, no one was surprised by.
No, not at all. It's a weird thing that I never thought about until rewatching these of like, meat's back on the menu means that they are going to, well, one, as they pointed out in the commentary, it implies that orcs have a society where they have a menu.
Yes, they have restaurants.
But also,
they're also the cannibalistic restaurants. Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird, because, that's the other thing is, like, the weird thing, because we do see later on that Saruman has a storehouse.
Mm-hmm.
But all we've heard about, like, the orcs eating is maggoty bread. Yeah.
They don't have a great palate. No. It sounds like.
Well,
and like, they don't have a whole lot of options. It feels a lot like having, like, a bunch of, like, outdoor dogs where you're like, here's your dinner. Sprinkle food.
Like that video of the woman feeding the cats where she's just sprinkling it all around that room full.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also, the way this is edited and cut together uses a great use of cliffhangers for the uninitiated, especially with Merry and Pippin's fate. Yes. Because us new to it, this scene ends with a horse about to come down on Merry and Pippin.
Yes, which would undoubtedly kill them.
Yeah. But also, again, just the build up to the infighting between the orcs and the Uruk-hai is quite well done, because in the books there's a lot more.
Yes.
And it's so complicated, but they did such a good job of simplifying it down to just...
Yeah, you get the gist.
Yeah. The orcs have no clue why they're even carrying the hobbits, and the Uruk-hai are like, hey, we have our orders. They've got some weapon.
They don't know what, but you cannot touch them.
Yes. But yeah, I mean, there's just so much done that I love about this. And in such a
short period of window.
Yeah.
That's what's impressive.
Yeah, because, I mean, in the chaos, the orcs and the Uruk-hai start getting slaughtered themselves by someone else.
Surprise!
The fate, we have no clue what's going to happen. Because now we cut to the hunting trio of Legolas, Gimli, and Aragorn meeting the riders of Rohan.
I love this scene.
I do too, because
it really establishes the old power that the Rohan used to have. Yeah,
and also continues that building up of the inner turmoil between not just men, but between other races as well, because they come across and they're like, so, actually I wrote a stupid joke for this.
Oh, of course you did.
So an elf, a man, and a dwarf walk into the river, or walk into the Riddermark.
Yes. Uh-huh.
It's that moment.
It is. But I love how, even though they have a man in the group, that doesn't change anything. Like, it is really establishing, like, no, everyone for themselves in Middle-earth right now.
Yeah, and even then, like, it's weird. It's weird to them seeing a ranger this far south.
Yeah, but they know what a ranger is.
Yeah, exactly. And the rangers are few and far between, as far as we're aware.
Yeah.
But also, as I've grown older, I love Gimli more and more, because he is just a blunt dick.
I love Gimli, and you have to also remember, Gimli, out of this group, would be the youngest. He would be the impulsive youth.
No, I think Gimli's older than Aragorn.
By age, but not by, like...
maturity.
Yeah.
I don't think any of the dwarves are very mature.
No, they very much feel like a bunch of bro frat guys, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, bless their hearts.
Yeah, there's like the one or two we see, the older ones in the later Hobbit movies.
Yeah, I mean, some of them do end up being put together.
Yeah.
Not Gimli.
Nope, not at all. But it also, this part builds up the cliffhanger that we just left off with Merry and Pippin, because the writers mentioned that they burned the orcs.
Yeah.
And they killed everyone. There's nothing alive. But it's also, this is a good part to start talking about the cultural designs of Lord of the Rings, because up until now, we've only seen glimpses of Minas Tirith, and briefly we saw Bree, of which Bree felt very generic human, and it was more of like an establishing how safe the Shire really was. We're not in Hobbiton anymore, Mr. Frodo moment.
Yes, very much so. And like, also, we only get to see it in the rain, in the dark, through the eyes of a bunch of scared hobbits. And
also, the only men we've seen at this point are Aragorn and Boromir. And
who we immediately establish are both terrible representations of men.
yeah, well, and
one's a ranger who doesn't want anything to do with anything, and the other is Boromir.
Yeah, and we've only seen them as two very drastically different.
Yeah.
Even though we know Aragorn has some type of royalty going into him, he's very much the vagabond Rasputin type.
Yes.
He has a little level of refinement and nobility in his wear, but
for the most part, he's clinging onto that ranger look.
Yeah, but and granted, we've only seen Aragorn in two costumes. We've seen him in his ranger, and we've also seen him in that very frilly,
it's so bad,
velvety thing.
I hate it so much.
Yeah, which
looks terrible.
I was watching, I think it's the Sword of Sherwood Forest.
Yes.
And that one is just so...
It's so...
typical bad medieval costuming.
Yes,
and
it is.
I was watching, I'm like, that's the point Chris was making. I didn't understand it at the time, but that's the point.
Men in Tights did better medieval costuming than that.
But Boromir, even of the, like, what we've seen of him, he feels regal.
Yes.
Like, even though...
all of his shit is nice.
Yeah, even though it looks... design-wise and shape-wise, it's similar to what Aragorn's wearing.
It's got so much detail.
Yeah, it's highly detailed. It looks like nice leather, not worn leather.
No, and like everything feels padded.
Mm-hmm.
Like when he goes out into the mountain, he's actually got cold gear on, whereas everyone else looks like they like rolled out of bed. Oops,
yeah,
didn't realize we were crossing a mountain today.
Yep.
Like, and on top of that, it's pretty well established too that Boromir is not just like the steward of Gondor's son, but also like he thinks highly of himself.
Yes.
Which always adds into like a character design on like how they present themselves.
And I'm glad we're doing the extended cut because they added some scenes in the second half of this movie that really establish...
they really like hammer home Boromir.
Yeah. Which they really do bring him back as like kind of a tragic villain.
I understand why we had to cut the scenes, but I think they make Boromir so much more likable.
Yes,
because if you've never seen the extended ones, it is easy to paint Boromir as a dick.
Yeah, just
an absolute ass.
And to a point, it's
he was, but there was more to it. He also had a terrible father.
Yeah, exactly.
Just a real asshole of a dad.
Yeah. But in designing Lord of the Rings, the crew wanted to create cultural iconographies.
Yes.
That really made them stand out because we're going to see a lot of men together and we have no clue.
Yeah, and you need them to be in their own camps.
Yeah.
That's important.
And the Rohan motifs are obviously horses.
Well, yeah, of course. But also, they've got that beautiful little underline of Viking. Yeah,
so I'll actually get into that in quite a bit, because I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole of English history.
Yes.
Also, I've been reading Vinland sagas, so I've been in this realm for a little bit.
Yes.
But their armor is of leather and chainmail, and for the most part, like our encounter with them, they're wielding spears. Everyone else we've seen is using swords and arrows to this point,
which makes sense. They're horse riders.
Yeah,
they're cavalry.
Exactly. But there's fabrics used in their design, which at the time fabric would be a newer thing. It's not a tanned leather.
Yep.
And also they're not cohesive at all. Everyone has their different armors, their different tribes, and they're not a formalized army at all. They're just kind of a band of buddies kind of feel.
They feel very pre King Arthur style and lore.
Yes, exactly. And we do get to see a little bit more refinement and solidarity in design once we do get to Edoras, which is the actual name of the city and not Rohan.
Yeah, Rohan Town.
Rohan Town, yeah. But another notable difference in their fighting styles is everyone has different fighting styles. The elves, the dwarves. All these routines were coordinated by Bob Anderson,
who is a legend. And we have talked about the man before.
In Princess Bride.
Yeah, which I gushed about him extensively.
That episode was quite a long ago now.
But now you can fully appreciate Bob's mastery of weapons. Because in Princess Bride, it was easy to be like, wow, this man mastered sword and then taught other people how to master it. He didn't just master sword, he mastered everything.
Well, and so he also did Zora, which I think would be a good one to talk about at some point.
Well, we have to pick one.
specifically the Antonio Banderas Zorro.
Fair. That one is very good.
But they mentioned that Anderson knew he's so well trained with the swords and styles that he knows where he can fudge reality.
Yes, and that is the true essence of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, is where they mentioned that you can defy real physics, but you can't defy the physics that the world has set up.
Exactly, which is why Legolas works in this goddamn universe.
Yes,
because otherwise he'd be ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, he is ridiculous,
but...
He
walks on top of snow.
He sees across the plane of the earth.
Yes.
He also flips backwards onto horses because the man fell off and broke a rib. Or cracked some ribs. Yeah,
I'll explain that in the next episode. But also apparently, little note, just to give even more clout to Viggo Mortensen. Apparently, he was the most fun to work with because he got super into learning the sword and only had 1 week of training before he had to.
And not just that, he from the time of the first one and then really solidified itself here in this second movie. He became really good friends and not just friends, but he was really impressed with the stunt crew to the point where he's like, I gotta headbutt these guys. Mm-hmm. We are brethren.
Yeah, because that's how he said goodbye to them on their last day.
Which, for some actors, being impressed and being part of the stunt crew is oh yeah, there's something in that to themselves. Whereas I think, especially for this movie, these main three, Gimli, Legolas, and Aragorn's characters, really needed to also be part of the stunt.
Yeah,
it was. You didn't want to just be okay, now I'm gonna switch out for my stunt double for them to do the flip, or to do the horse riding.
Yeah.
They really wanted to encompass it themselves, which meant trying to be as much with the stunt crew as possible.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing about Lord of the Rings is we don't hear about it too much because I've watched some special features on Harry Potter here and there,
sure,
where they talk about that in the cast seems to have a family feel to them.
Yeah,
but this is one of the few ones where everyone felt like a family from their description.
Yeah, every part of the crew, not just the main acting group, but down to the makeup group, down to the special effects group, everyone was part of this.
I think that's just also indicative of, one, they say in New Zealand, that's just part of their culture is they buckle down and get it done, so there's that camaraderie. But also, how they talk about it was very much that indie culture of they were doing this for the love of it.
Yes.
Multiple people have said that even if I lost money, I was still enjoying it. Because I think a couple of the crew members technically or head of the departments technically lost money making this movie. But they still would have done it regardless.
Yes.
Also, side little note, a lot of these writers were women with beards from the local equestrian societies.
Which works out perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, we don't see their face. But
you don't care.
It's a fun little thing knowing.
Yes.
Actually, bearded women.
Yeah, we don't. Yeah, the upcoming TV series will be our first proper view of dwarvish women.
Yes, which I actually did a little bit of digging because of the start of next episode.
Yes.
There's some mention of that, and one of the hairstylists at Urban Blue was talking to me about the trailer because I don't watch trailers,
of
so
course.
She's like, there's some things we're concerned about.
I can understand.
I will dissolve that concern in the next episode.
Yes.
But since we're on design and diversification of Lord of the Rings, I wanted to weave a little bit more of our talk of the music into the discussion instead of saving it for the end like we did with the last one.
Love this song.
This movie, they said, was the most difficult for the composers since there isn't a beginning and end, as we've mentioned.
Yep.
But they wanted to create something humbling while weaving in multiple elements.
Yes.
And for Rohan, specifically, they used hard fiddle and folk music, which...
And it becomes one of the shining songs of all three movies.
I think, Rohan is Hobbiton has its song and the Fellowship has its song.
And then of course you've got your trek through the mines. You've got the marching song. But the Rohan song just really implants itself as the depression of Middle Earth.
Yeah, and there's just this beautiful glow to the fiddle work. And I honestly, I gotta say, design-wise, Rohan is probably my favorite.
I agree.
I love Celtic design and work, so...
Well, and I think part of the fun of Rohan, where you don't get with some of the... especially the worlds of men, the towns of men, you don't have as much to play with, at least at this point, with the elves, and you get nothing from the dwarves.
Yeah.
I think part of the reason why Rohan, for a lot of people, is a cornerstone for them is because you can see the glimpses of glory.
Yeah.
Whereas with Gondor, they still trying to uphold it. There's not a lot left to the imagination of what the royal court would look like if it was put together, and then you get to see it a little bit at the end.
Yeah.
Whereas this one, until the curse is lifted, you can easily tell how things should be in this town. Yeah,
well, and on top of that, Rohan feels more... Rohan has more in common with the hobbits than it does with Minas Tirith.
Yes.
Because it feels more realistic, because let's also remember, Middle-earth is kind of in a way, an attempted fictional origin story for England.
Yes, in a way.
Yeah, and I'll get into that with the actual architecture of Rohan and its influences, because it's complex and interesting, but it's something to go over. But also in regards to the language of the songs, these were all transcribed by the now Tolkien translator David Salo, who this was his first role doing this. I think he had a job and he lied to them saying hey, I can do all this writing, because he did all the writing for all the books and everything.
Yeah. And it wasn't like he just showed up as hey, I kind of like it. He already knew a ton.
And he sent them some samples and stuff in, and they're like, oh, yeah, well, we'll meet with you if you're in town. And he's like, yes, I will be in town.
I will be in town. Buys plane ticket.
Yeah, buys plane ticket and flew down. Just lied that he did, I
just happened to be in New Zealand.
No, he's a New Zealander.
Yeah,
he just was 2 hours away or some shit.
It's the equivalent of us being yeah, we're in America.
Yeah.
No, we're totally in
town. And so, from meeting the Rohirrim, they're given safe passage, and the trio goes to the still smoldering pile.
And now we get to tell you about the fact everyone tells you about every time they watch this movie.
Because Viggo is great in this scene.
It's so good.
His breakdown, and the thing is, they took 10 different takes of this.
They did.
And the last one they used was him kicking the helmet and breaking his toe.
Yes. And it is perfect.
Yeah.
It is the perfect anguish.
It is. And that's the thing is, Mortensen is such a great actor.
Yes.
That even if you didn't know he broke his toe, just turning that, because I've seen
honestly,
outtakes.
just hearing it.
Yeah.
Just hearing the yell, you're like, oh, shit.
Yeah. Well, and on top of that, I guess there was crew or something just over the end, they almost got hit with the helmet too. But there's just something it just, that's the thing with everything about Lord of the Rings. The more you learn about it, and just the lore and everything around it, it just adds to that depth that these movies carry through them.
And I can finally sneak in one of my favorite things to do while watching all three of these movies. And from here on, it gets more and more progressive.
What's that?
Orlando Bloom had a really hard time hearing. The entire time, but especially starting here because it was so windy. Mm. And while given direction, half the time he didn't know when they were rolling.
So that's why he's got that look on his face.
Yes. And so especially in the background of scenes, but this is the start he has said in a couple of interviews where he's yeah, it was really windy that day. I couldn't really hear the direction. I knew, obviously I knew what the scene was. I knew my lines and all that. But I wasn't ever really sure when cues were. Yeah. Which is why Legolas for most of the movie looks like a clueless dwarf. And this is the start of it, and from here till the very end is just the progression of Legolas forever looking lost.
I kind of dig it though. I think it just adds to his character.
No, it does, because Legolas's character throughout all of this, and the movies really help solidify this to me, because I'd read the books before I had seen the movies and all that. But I feel like this really helped solidify him and Gimli, these movies, because seeing a very young-looking guy looking lost, confused, and upset about the world, even though he's just upset because he can't hear shit.
Yeah.
but it reads so well as like he knew all of this. Like, he's seen the world. He's been around a long time. He walked with rangers for a long time. But to finally truly get to see, like, oh, there's really no justice in this world.
Yeah.
Like, for all he knows right now, the hobbits are dead.
Well, and I mean, we can go back to even further the elf, or the
Like,
elf.
he's seen a lot.
Well, I mean, I'm going back to, like, Lord of the Rings lore of, like,
Oh, sure.
the first killing of the kin, and back in, I can't remember the name of the land. The land that's to the east.
Over there.
Super far east. The Undying Land.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of because it's not touched on this movie at all. It's vaguely touched on that.
Yeah, like the writers sneak it in as like a, hey, we know what we're doing. But like, it's not part of this.
Even elves hate elves.
Yeah, both.
Yeah. There's so much.
Nobody likes each other.
No. But in this scene also just shows like that weaving of the story and informing the audience as the characters are learning, because Aragorn now makes me think of this stupid fucking scene from Walker, Texas Ranger, where he does the push-up, taste the dirt, a plane crashed here, and we're just looking at like piles of grass and shit.
But like, at the same time, I love the progression of this, because most tracking scenes in movies, I would argue, are pretty terrible. Mostly because the clues that are given are either way too obvious, or they're so vague, you're like, no one can actually, like, do that. It's
like, what's that one detective you like? Moreau.
Yes.
Where it's like, oh, yes, because your name is this, you're connected to X, Y, and Z. And it's like, how? But, we don't know this shit.
Yes.
But
this, especially showing it the way they do, where we get the initial rage, and, like, instead of looking for the hobbits, he's just looking for answers.
Yeah.
Of like, okay, well, maybe I can find something to take back.
Well, not even looking for answers. He just kind of accidentally stumbles upon it.
And then as he goes through, and like, each piece that he's pointing out is clear enough for the audience that you can be like, oh, okay, yeah, if you're looking for it, I can see how you could find the rope and make that connection. I can see how you can see the horse hoof prints in the grass.
Yep.
I can see where the grass is flattened. But it's not so blatantly obvious as like, oh, look at this piece of cloth floating in the wind on the bush.
Yeah, because we're also cutting back to showing what was happening back then. Yeah,
and it's such a good transition between past, present, flipping back and forth, that like, you're fully invested in it, and by the time, like, it ramps up to by the time that the hobbits are actually running into the woods, so are the characters in the present.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's an interesting use of flashback, and it's creatively done. It's not just a blatant and boring flashback.
It doesn't just tell you, like, you already know.
Yeah.
You already know that they've escaped, because, like, oh, of course they did. The story's not over.
Yeah, it's not like in Silent Hill, where we get that one big flashback at the end, but we've had, like, the inklings building up to it.
And so, like, it's also a really great way of having two different timelines converge, because the way the books are written, like, you do a lot of flipping between past and present.
Yep.
And it's kind of up to you to remember who is in what time. And this is a really smart way of telling you how everyone got to where they are simultaneously, as opposed to having to constantly flip back and like reset the viewer's clock. Yeah, no, and it's just a testament to how skillful Peter Jackson was with making these movies. And so, from here into Fangorn we go, where, I love Fangorn Forest. The orcs are, a bit hangry, and, I do like the way he says, let's put a maggot hole in your belly. Yes. It's the perfect level of like, oh, that's gross and scary. Yeah. It's like, But also, like, I think it works because we are in Fangorn. Yeah. And from the minute we enter Fangorn, because we've had the lore already talked about around how, like, Fangorn's not a natural forest. Yeah, because we were talking about how in the beginning, like, when they're outside, you're hearing, like, the trees kind of chit-chat. Yeah, like, and it's not like because, like, I live in the middle, I grew up in the middle of, like, the creepy, like, mountain woods. Yeah. So, like, creepy mountain woods, I'm very familiar with the spooky noises of the woods. these trees are such a good sound design because they are constantly creaking.
Yeah.
It's not just like, oh, an animal could have made that noise. Oh, there's something rustling in the leaves. No, the trees themselves are what's aching.
Here's what's good about it too, and I don't think they talk about it specifically, but it makes me think of like being in a really, really old wooden house and just listening to it settle.
And like it never stops settling.
Yeah.
Yes. It's exactly that. And it's not the sound of like trees snapping. It's not the sound of like bark scraping. It is the sound of two trees rubbing against each other.
It is a groaning noise.
It is a groaning noise. And like I have a couple trees in my own yard that like they do that, but only during like high wind. For the most part, they're settled. They grew together. Yeah. This forest is unsettled all the time.
No, and we even hear like how close it is to the Hobbitons as well.
Yes.
Of like, hey, this
like even they have lore about it.
Yeah. And it also sets apart, like, these trees are different from the trees Frodo was chilling on at the beginning of the Fellowship. But normally, so I have a weird hate, really. It's not a love-hate. I have come to really hate slow motion.
Yeah, I understand.
AKA Battlefield Earth.
Yeah.
But the slow motion intro to Treebeard is actually quite nice. Because
Treebeard lives in slow motion.
Well, Peter Jackson does a lot of good use of slow motion in this to allow, and he uses it intelligently to a point where it allows us to take in information.
And you could almost argue that Treebeard isn't in slow motion. Like, you forget that it's there.
Yeah. Well, because what happens is Mary's up in the tree.
Yeah.
And just these eyes open up.
Yeah.
And that little bit of slowness allows us to take in that information of the absurdity of what we're seeing.
Yes.
Which I think you guys have a face on one of your trees in your...
I have made many a face for trees for family members, yes.
Yeah, it's kind of like that.
Yes. And we've done some in the past where we've had people walk through the woods and some of them are so old we have forgotten that they're there.
Yeah.
And so we'll have people walk through and be like, the fuck fungus is on your tree?
I think that was me. I'm like, what the fuck is that over there?
Yeah. It's like, oh yeah, we forgot we put faces on the trees.
Yeah. But
because, that's not creepy.
I do love the Ents in this movie.
I do too. And in a deeper way than all the other character designs.
Well, and also just the introduction to Treebeard. Because we do learn that they normally move slowly. But Treebeard is one of those ones who is one call to action. We see him move right away.
Yeah.
Because, and that's the thing, they don't want to kill unless necessary. But they're about to see someone else get killed, so they're killing the killer.
Yes. They are forced into action.
And I just love how, he has that one gut reaction, and then he's like, oh, what are you guys? What's this? What's this?
And
there's hobbits in my head?
Yes.
What's a hobbit?
Yeah. But part of the reason that Treebeard works the way he does is the beautiful work between real prop and CGI. Because having the hobbits actually be stuck in the tree, because they left them there.
Yeah.
They put in bicycle seats into Treebeard's hands because those were the actual physical props. And they're like, all right, we have to take a quick lunch break to reset some stuff. You guys good up there?
Yeah. I mean...
And it works so well because if they had just been, sitting on wires and green screened the whole thing, I don't think Treebeard would have felt as real.
Yeah.
And not real in it's a walking tree, but we just watched him crush a being to death.
Yeah.
From that point forward, it is made abundantly clear that Treebeard has the ability to change a huge amount right now if he wanted to, but he doesn't. He's more interested in small trees.
The Ents are very much like Switzerland to Middle Earth.
Yes. I think even the writers had written their dialogue to be kind of the in-betweeners.
Yeah.
They don't want to necessarily take action because they don't see it as
it's
theirs
not
to
their
deal
issue.
With. No.
I think I have it written. I do have it written for the next part. The Ents are very much for relating it back to a World War II allegorical story or just a war story in general. They're very much the pacifists.
They are.
But they're pacifists who are forced into action.
Yes.
But on the Ents a little bit, I I believe they were partially inspired by the moving trees in Macbeth.
Yes.
Which was done quite well in it reminds me of Akira Kurosawa's Throne of Blood, which is an adaptation of that. But they said that the Ents were some of the more difficult ones to create and they took the longest to develop because they didn't want them just to feel like comedic trees with human faces.
Yes, but they also didn't want them to be too much like the rest of, like, too realistic, too grounded. This is one of the few places where they were able to take the old inspirations of, like, the old drawings that inspired the old Hobbit and Lord of the Rings books. And so you can really see it. Treebeard somewhat, I think the other trees show it even better. Yeah. Where, like, especially if you've seen the old work for, like, the old dwarves for Hobbit, where it's, like, a potato nose. Mm-hmm. Like, they reek of that old fairy tale styling.
Yeah, I was thinking...
They almost don't feel like they belong in this world, but they do.
Yeah, it also stems back a little bit to, and I don't know a whole lot about this portion of lore, but, like, the Green Man.
Yes.
In, like, Celtic mythology.
Yes. And, like... I think that works even better because even to this world, even to Middle Earth, they are their own folklore. Like, they've been lost pretty much.
Well, and to give a little bit of context as well, the Ents are the ones who taught the elves language. Yeah. The Cinderil. Cinderil? Cinderil, the language of the elves. But...
And you could argue that their wives taught gardening and how to grow food, which they've been lost and now everyone's sad, blah, blah, blah. Not part of this movie.
It's mentioned, but
it is mentioned.
There's more to it. But it's, again, there's so much depth that you could go into.
You could just go forever.
But Treebeard's eyes were meant to be like amber sap.
Yes.
And his bark was taken from molds of the Pubtuqua tree? I butchered that.
But they picked actual trees to, like, model everyone off of.
Yeah, and it was just outside their workshop. And they chose it because there's no other bark that has that feel.
Yeah. It's very, like, pronounced.
Yeah.
It stands up off the tree nicely.
They really did a good job with Treebeard as well, just making him feel like if a tree had a nose.
Yes.
How would that look?
And, like, they also, like, worked very hard on, like, how would Treebeard move? How would he walk? Mm-hmm. Because in some iterations, the trees, like, creep through the forest as opposed to, like, having legs that walk.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, he's not a tree.
Yeah.
He's not a tree. He is something that just looks like a tree.
Exactly. And because we do see some stuff, too. Like, when he steps down, he kind of roots himself down for a second.
Yes, and one of the writers mentioned that she really wanted Treebeard to feel like if he stood still too long, he would stop moving entirely.
Yes, and they do mention that some of the Ents have stopped and did turn to trees.
Yeah.
But it took a hell of a long time to do that. And speaking of Treebeard this took quite a bit of time because they weren't sure how an Ent should sound, and they ended up using the voice actor the actor for Gimli, John Rhys Davies.
Yes.
What they ended up doing was they pitched his voice down and used wooden boxes to reflect as to reflect the noise for a deeper woody resonance that you get when you're talking into like a wooden box.
And what I also love is where Gimli doesn't necessarily talk fast, but he never really pauses in his wording.
Yeah.
Like, whatever he's coming out of his head is, like, coming right out of his mouth.
Yeah, there's the ho-hum.
Yeah, like
where he's thinking of saying the right word to say.
Yes. Where Treebeard, every syllable is slow.
Yeah.
He talks like an old Southern man. Real slow.
I done reckon. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
and it works so well because, like, even if you could put together that, like, oh, there's a reoccurring voice.
Yeah.
You don't recognize it.
No, you really don't. And
like, it feels like his own being.
Yeah. Same with Baker, who did a bunch of the orcs. Is like
you do not recognize it.
And each orc feels distinct.
Yes. Like, none of them feel repetitive.
Yeah. Exactly. And even with Fangorn, so, also speaking of the Ents, back to them, they were supposed to feel like arthritic old men.
That success.
And the Fangorn set, because they couldn't find the perfect forest, they ended up using real moss and earth and just, like,
touching it onto stuff.
Yeah. And they used driftwood for the roots to give the trees a much older feeling, like a weather-worn feeling.
Yeah.
And they again, like the rocks, they built like, I think it was like 8 or 9 of these trees and then just rearranged them for a diversity of shots.
Which works even better for Fangorn because, like, it feels like it is never ending.
Yeah.
Like, it just kind of continues on. Like, you are lost the moment you walk in.
And because they built all this stuff on a set, they also had to bring in bags upon bags of leaves for the forest floor, which ended up kind of poetically having a shit ton of Weddas in them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for the impressive, like, longer shots, they used miniatures, which...
The miniatures in this movie are just phenomenal.
But there is one part I don't really care for in this part. It's I don't really like the part of the White Wizard will know. I know it's supposed to, I know it's in the book, I know it's supposed to establish, like, hey, something sketchy is going on, because the only White Wizard we've seen is, and it's also establishing that as a first-time viewer, you don't know whose side the Ents really are on at this point.
Yes.
Because the only White Wizard we know is Saruman.
Yes. You could also make the argument that an audience who hasn't read the books yet don't know how many wizards there are yet.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't know, maybe there is a White Wizard. Who is he?
Yeah, because, I mean, we did, and that's the thing, is we did used to know Saruman the White, but now he is Saruman the multicolored.
The rainbow gay.
Such a stew. Like, I mean,
I understand it from a book perspective, because when you read that, you are left in your head with, like, shiny iridescence.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, cool. And then you actually hear it and you're like, oh, rainbow.
Yeah.
That's not scary.
It makes me think of reading Rainbow. It's a wizard that's going to take you on a reading journey.
Yes.
Yeah. And so from Fangorn, we cut back to finally, I think they only have like maybe 2 or 3 scenes this whole movie, really. We cut back to Frodo and Samwise and Gollum as we see more rocks.
It's a lot of rocks.
When we get a little bit into the bog, which
I like the bog.
This is one of the most memorable scenes for me too as a kid.
Yeah.
Because we get a good building and explanation of the dead marshes. For the marshes. For those who didn't catch on to this is where the epic battle of the prologue was.
Yes.
So
that's why there's a bunch of dead elves.
Yeah, dead elves, dead humans. Everyone's equal in that aspect.
Yes, everybody dead.
I'll actually, the next bit, I'll go a little bit into elf death.
Elf death.
There's a little bit more to it.
There is.
But a lot of people also assume that this was taken from the trenches of World War I.
And I can understand the similarities.
Yes. Also, I love this part because Gollum is such a drama queen.
Yes. And I feel like this is really solidifying the, like, love of Gollum. Because up until now, he's just kind of been a creepy creeper.
Yeah.
Like, gross, slimy, forever stalking, don't like. And then you start seeing him being dramatic as hell, and you're like, okay, now we're a little bit endearing.
Yeah, just a little bit of, like, they're giving him the bread, and it's like, it burns! He's trying to kill us!
It tastes like shit!
As he eats a worm from the ground.
Yeah, literally slurps a worm.
But we also get to see a little bit of, like, kindring of spirits between Gollum and Frodo.
Yes.
Especially when we see Frodo, like, petting the ring.
And, like, I like this too because this also is starting the solidification of, like, Sam trying to be open-minded. Yeah. But at the same time, this man did try to just kill us.
Yeah, exactly. And, because Sam is so weirdly endearing.
Yes.
And his, like, Sam almost feels very... I know what it is. Sam feels like our stereotypical view of an Englishman.
Yes, he does.
That is exactly why he's so endearing.
Watson. He's just Watson.
He actually, yeah, kind of. But I'll say a little bit dumber Watson.
Watson from the TV show in the 50s.
I haven't seen that.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah.
You would love it. Arguably the best Sherlock Holmes.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know a lot about the Sherlock series.
It's okay. I will introduce you to all of them someday.
I'm down.
Yeah.
But there's a level of cartoony horror to this parts too, because Frodo falls in. We all float down here, Mr. Frodo.
Yes. And I will say, the spooky ghost, while CGI is... When it came out, it scared me.
Well, yes, but and also at the same time, I mean, it is also very... It feels Scooby-Doo-esque.
Yes.
But it works because it continues kind of that tradition of, while The Hobbit was 100% a children's story, Lord of the Rings, in a way, is kind of like one of those folklore stories you would tell a child to scare them at night.
Like, you could get away with leaving out parts of Lord of the Rings to tell a kid. Yes. Yeah. But then you add in everything else, and you're like, this isn't really a kid's story. There's a lot of death.
Yeah. Well,
we kill a lot of people.
I mean... my children's stories of the stuff I read as a kid.
I feel like normal children.
Yeah, I have to rearrange myself that
most children don't watch horror films like we did.
No, not at all. But
nor did they watch Dateline.
I
don't know why I was allowed to watch that. Mine
was Unsolved Mysteries.
I liked 24 as well.
I remember I didn't have access to a lot of that stuff, so but I also have a question. The way Gollum reacts and pulls Frodo out, and like just the fear in his eyes, I have a feeling Gollum somehow got trapped in the marshes at one point.
It does feel like he already knows.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like he truly knows.
How else would he know, like, don't look into their eyes?
Yeah. Like, this poor creature already did this path by himself.
Yeah.
That's how he knows where all this is.
Yeah. It is terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, you really do pity Gollum. In a new way. Like, even the old stories, even the old tellings of this, like, it was easy to forget the tragedy of Gollum.
Yes, because we do get a little bit of that. We get a little nod to that, because Frodo, after being pulled out, becomes nicer and nicer, too, as he starts calling him Smeagol.
Yes.
And
and this is some of the brilliance of Gollum's character.
And CGI work, too.
Yes, because it is one of the only times that we see this Gollum creature ever be smoothly and simultaneously both Gollum and Smeagol at the same time. And part of that was they really praised the actor for being able to, like, flip himself.
Yes.
They're like, we didn't really have to cut anything. We did it for the audience, not for him.
Yeah. It just shows how they did such a good job of just casting. And casting right from the get-go.
Yeah, like, people truly were their characters in a new way.
Yeah. And I don't think we've really seen movies too much like that. And I think part of that is just because we have so much in the lives of these big celebrities now.
Yeah.
That some of these people had been around for quite a while, but we weren't they're not like super public people, I'd say.
Yeah, and I think the other reason that, like, this went to a level that others hadn't was we had movies where people became their character in a way, but it was usually just the guys who played the main character became that character. This is one of the first movies where, like, even the bad guys became their own character.
Yeah.
Like, to an extent of just more than, like, well, I needed the bad guy to be believable, I needed you to hate him. No, like, truly embodying being a two spirits in one body Gollum creature. That is next level thinking for this character, who honestly is kind of just, like, in this story in all of the other tellings.
Yeah, he's
he doesn't get a whole lot of lines in the other movies.
No, he really doesn't, because he's only glimpsed twice in The Fellowship.
Yeah.
And then Return of the King, he has a bigger part, but he's also kind of hidden away for a good chunk of it too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I've had that exact moment of being called, like, your actual name.
Yes.
And not the stupid, or my nickname is pretty much my name now, but it's that weird feeling of, like, someone calling you by your full name.
Yes.
Which, yeah, you have that too. So.
Yes, I flip violently between my names.
Yeah. But also at this point, we're also reestablishing how much peril the hobbits really are in.
Yes.
Not only are they have to worry about, what's the term? Field damage.
Yes.
We are reintroduced to the Black Riders.
And I love the new version of the Black Riders.
Yeah.
The giant dragon-winged death worms.
Which I have a little bit more of it, because we get more detailed views of them later on.
Yes, we do. But the screeching.
Oh, man.
Oh, And we've gushed on the sound design before, but once you really get into character, like creature sounds,
yes,
it is so easy to accidentally reproduce a creature from some other movie or some other franchise. These creatures don't sound like anything else.
Yeah.
And it is perfect.
Yeah, no,
they sound like a nightmare yelling.
Yeah, actually, that is a good description of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really cool. I just, again, we're gushing all over this movie.
So good, despite being the least of the three.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But and also why Tolkien in like this movie works is because the lack of horror description. It's very much he vaguely describes creatures in a very similar way to H.P. Lovecraft.
Where there's a lot left up for you to imagine.
Yeah. Where stuff is just mentioned and it's in the backstory, but it's quite different in compared to other fantasy movies where they try and recreate something that's already been done before.
And I think this is where Tolkien and the writing crew and the character design crew really understood each other well. Like the writing crew and the character crew really saw Tolkien's work and put it in really well. Because while we get a full shot of this creature, you don't understand its limits. Like, you are never given its full capacity. No. Ever. Even later on when we see it fight in battle.
No.
Which really helps, let you fill in the details of, does this thing spit acid? Does it have extra teeth? Is it fast on the ground? Yeah,
you're right. It does kind of have, a xenomorphic quality to it.
Yeah. Where, there could be more to it. And on top of that, we were originally told, the riders have horses.
Yeah.
Scary, not the worst.
No.
I know how fast a horse goes.
Yeah.
But now we learn that, no, there's more stuff hidden in...
There is a weird lack of, creatures in the very beginning of the movies.
Yeah. And the ones that we're given, we're told, oh, that's a one-off.
Yeah.
That thing never exists anywhere else. That's crazy we ran into that.
Yeah, because we really don't have anything until the later half of the first movie.
Yeah.
With, we've seen we got the orcs, you got the Balrog, and you got the cave troll and Smeagol.
And you get your octopus thing, but you get told immediately that, the octopus thing and the Balrog are special.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, those are one-offs, gotta throw those into a bucket by themselves. And then you get told that there's 7 of these things flying around? Oh, fuck no.
Or hiding somewhere.
Yeah,
we don't
there's
know.
more?
Yeah.
And then you get told, well, oh, no, that's just their air mount. They have others. They do? What?
All-terrain vehicle, baby.
They do. You're never truly given the entire hand that the monsters are available to.
Yeah.
You get told, oh, well, yeah, troll caves are a thing. And you're like, excuse me, what?
Yeah.
Oh, you have them to just open your front door? Excuse fucking me?
Actually,
you don't even use these things in battle? You just use them to open your door? What do you use in battle? Elephants.
Them. Actually, they use them later.
They do. But that's part, I think, of how they reinterpreted Tolkien's vagueness in his descriptions. They just, without truly defining any of what anything's capable of, minus the real low level ones.
Yeah.
We know what an orc's capable of. We know what an Uruk-hai is capable of. Still bad. We don't really know what the top level stuff's capable of doing.
Yeah, not really. Well, actually, we do. We
find out later, but
yeah.
Not in an immediate oh, okay, I got that.
Not where we're at in this point.
Yeah.
And before we move on, I do want to talk about the quote-unquote design of the marshes.
Yes. So squishy.
They had to do this on a set in the parking lot, which was the same wet set that were used for the Gates of Moria, because Jackson had wanted to use a real bog, but...
Surprise! Bogs are not great for filming.
And they're not very stable because his first time visiting, the helicopter wouldn't land on it.
No, of course not.
And when he stepped into it, he fell and it collapsed under him. He's like, well, I can't bring people out here, so...
No, you can't.
But they did use the Kepler-Meyer for the aerial shots, which is what they were originally wanting to use.
And it flows very nicely. It's very believable.
Yeah, and for this one, they used matte paintings for the background.
Looks good.
Very beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're getting closer to Mordor.
Yes.
And from here, we cut back to Fangorn and the hunting trio, where we are quickly reintroduced to Gandalf.
I love the reintroduction to Gandalf because, even though it's a little silly, it is a good, like, I think it's the best way they could have reintroduced someone who is supposed to be a brand new entity.
Yeah.
Who happens to be a reincarnation of an old entity.
Well, and also, I do like what they do with this is they're also showing how powerful wizards are, where they say, cut him down before he speaks. His words are going to carry power, basically. Which
is hilarious for a director who doesn't like magic.
Yeah. And, well, doesn't even really use it, because honestly, Gandalf doesn't use magic. He just
Gandalf is, in fact, a human nightlight.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's just shiny.
Yeah, well, and I also like that, so, because we don't know that it's Gandalf.
No. And this is another brilliant part, is the director mentioned that, like, he used both wizards' faces for this, like, quick before you know who it is, just in case people are like, oh, that's Sauron's eyes. That's Sauron's eyes.
Not just their faces, he used their voices, too.
And it truly does work, because even after I've seen this, 100 billion times?
Yeah.
You can actively fool yourself into being like, well, maybe this time.
Yeah.
Like, it's such an easy ploy.
It's so well done. And I do like that when they're like, oh, Gandalf. And he's like,
Gandalf?
Oh, wait, yes, I did used to be called that.
Which I love, because if you, like, especially if you read the books, you're like, yeah, you had, 100 names. Everywhere you went, you're like, yeah, you can call me this.
Well, and I do like that they reestablished that, yes, he did technically die.
Yes.
But he
came back with more XP.
Well, he's a Mire, and they are immortal, and they were sent to do a task, but because he's the one who's still doing his task...
Yes.
They sent him back to do it.
Yes.
It's like, oh, you died. You gotta respawn, bro.
You gotta respawn. Everyone else is fucking off doing other shit.
But I do like his reintroduction of, he's like, oh yeah, I fought and I died. And then, I lived multiple lifetimes, which explains why he's forgetting his stuff. And is kind of, showing, why he's forgetful. He's not his old Gandalf. He can't smoke the way he used to. But I love this shot because it's very much a 2001: A Space Odyssey-like shot.
Yes, it is. But it all ties together into, because it is shot differently, it finally gives some lightness to Fangorn. Which is nice, because up until now, it's just been a suffocating forest.
Yeah, we have a new shining light. That we actually have a little bit of hope again.
Yes.
That's why it's so good while it's cheesy, it still works.
It does. It does work. It is very metaphorical.
It is. But I also like that immediately... he recloaks himself in gray.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta hold your cards dear to your heart. Yep.
And we are introduced to Shadowfax.
A beautiful horse. Who was apparently very, very well behaved.
And our trio is now a quartet.
Yes.
But
For a little while.
Yeah, and they said they had a hard time with it because how Gandalf is supposed to ride, I think they said there's a small saddle that they're able to hide underneath his cloak.
Yeah.
And stabilize him, because... Shadowfax doesn't have reins like all the other horses.
He is the king of horses, and how dare you saddle the king of horses?
Yeah, because he does. They do quickly mention it. This is the sire of all horse kind.
Yeah, he is the legendary horse of Rohan.
Yeah,
and it makes even without directly addressing it, even without fully understanding the lore. Having Gandalf be like, well, I get to ride him. You all have to ride other horses, though.
It's also a reversal of the Black Knight that we see in lore of being kind of an anti-hero or an antagonist.
Yeah.
Gandalf literally is a white knight.
He is literally a white knight.
Yeah. And so now that we know the hobbits are fine, because Gandalf does explain that, I
saw those guys.
Merry and Pippin are fine. They're with Treebeard. He's cool.
He's cool, bro. Don't worry about
it. We cut back to Treebeard and the hobbits, and I think this part is important in building the hobbits back up again, because they're really forced into a changing world. This is where we have Treebeard walking, giving the history of the Ents, the Entwives. They've lost them.
Yeah. And it is a wonderful interpretation of how boring this part of the book is, but how important it is.
Yeah, because we got to build up who the Ents are.
Yeah. And how they literally don't have anything left to lose.
Yeah, because we talked about the Ents a shit ton at the beginning, but you don't know this. That introduction to Treebeard, are you orcs? I don't know. That sounds like orc logic to me. But Yeah, it's interesting. And of note, all the music used in Fangorn was woodwind instruments.
It works so well.
Or wooden instruments. Yeah. Now we cut back to Aragorn and Gandalf speaking as we learn that they're camping, they're just chilling. But we learn that Sauron fears Aragorn, who we really get to know is he's the heir of Numenor.
Yes. And how Gandalf is more poking than ever before of like, dude, you really gotta like do something about this. You can't just
step up your game, bitch.
You're 85 years old. You need to get online.
87.
You've had your fun. Get back to how. Like get stuff done, man.
But it's also a good way to build up Frodo's importance because Aragorn, who kind of is like, actually Aragorn's kind of the Jesus character in this movie.
A little bit.
Yeah.
He's King Arthur-y.
That's probably a better term.
Yeah.
It's really showing that like, hey, you're not stepping up, so we're having to make this little tiny hobbit go do your shit for you, bro.
Look at him. Look how sad you're making him.
Yeah. But it's also, in rewatching this, it's interesting just to note that the hobbits don't have any real special lineage.
No, they just exist.
But the world relies on them so much. And
without realizing it. Because everywhere they go, they're like, have you seen hobbits? And everyone's like, oh, the fuck's a hobbit?
Yeah. Well, and yeah, because when they meet the writers of the Ridden Mark...
they have to describe what they look like.
Yeah,
they'd be like children to you.
Yeah, exactly.
And he's like, we did not murder children.
Yeah.
Would have noticed that.
Yeah. Well, and also, the hobbits are like the force of change. The common people are the ones who are going to change everything, and not really...
It's not necessarily the people in power.
Yeah.
Or who should be in power.
Exactly. And from here, we do cut to the Black Gates of Mordor.
Such a cool design.
It is
so cool.
Yes.
So gothic.
Well, yes and no. So... And I'm saving a good chunk of this for when we talk about Return of the King.
Because you get a much better view of it.
Much better view, and you actually get more of Mordor than you do in this. But the gates are terrifyingly pieced together.
Yes.
And it feels like the gates were there, and like with all orcish architecture, especially the more refined stuff, not Isengard thrown together, piecemeal army.
Yeah.
It feels like there was something there, and then the orcs just clamped on their metal pieces to it to imitate like Isengard's design.
Yes, it very much feels like they just welded on their own shit.
But it also is used to show a continuing building of the forces that, hey, there's men joining the orcs.
Yes.
But also, I feel there was a little bit of a lost design intent on this.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
My only issue with it is, and it might not have an issue with it. Basically, I feel the gate should have a couple things. One, I felt like the main fortifications should have been facing the other side, because the Black Gate was built to keep the forces of Mordor in.
Yeah.
Also, if you're wanting to do that, you wouldn't want the gates opening out to you, really.
Do the gates open out?
Yeah.
I thought the gates opened in.
No, they open out. Well, they open out to the rest of the world. They're supposed to keep the forces of Mordor back.
Ah, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You would think that they'd want them to be reinforced from behind.
Yes.
But then again, it could be modifications that the orcs did.
Yeah,
after the fact. But
hard to say.
My little thoughts on that. But also, I love this part too, because this was one of the... I had moments when I was a kid, like running down rock hills because of this movie.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
But the fake rock effect of the cloaks is so well done when they fall.
And it's so smart, because this is one of the things from the books that the writers really were like, we can't show the cloaks changing colors depending on where everyone is.
No.
That would just confuse people without... And then we'd have to add dialogue, and it's not good. But we can throw this in here, and no one... Like, everyone's like, yeah, of course, magic cloaks. Got those from that one growl with the blue eyes. Yeah, makes sense. Same place as the rope, right?
Yeah. Well, and on top of that, like, not only that, but, like, just how they frame everything in this movie. Because we know that, okay, they're going... The bad men are going into Mordor.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't really get a face to them. We just get their eyes.
Shifty.
Yeah, which the weird thing is like we talk about like how eyes are so important to human communication.
Yeah.
But when they're the only thing that's seen,
it's intimidating.
It is.
Yeah.
Very much so. And we'll get into their design a little bit more in the next
Yes.
second to last episode, because you see them more clearly.
Yes.
Actually, yeah, because we don't really get a clashing of men until the very last movie.
Exactly.
But we're also introduced to Smeagol's sneaky ways. So he's like, no, you guys can't go in there, because he got caught.
Yeah, he's already tried this.
Yeah. Also, the gate was a bigotry that was created in a community hall.
It still looks damn good.
Yeah. And now we cut back to the hobbits in the Treebeard's house. Clearing.
In the movie, it's a clearing.
Yeah.
No house in this one.
Nice little bit of comedy we get.
Yeah, and
Merry and Pippin still being dipshits.
I do like it because while the entire arc of Merry Pippin is them arguably growing up and into the responsibilities that they've already been supposed to be doing this whole time.
Yeah.
It is nice to see that, like, it is hard to beat out the Hobbit in a Hobbit.
Yeah.
Like, it's hard to beat out that, like, joy, like, the finding little things.
It goes back to, I don't know if it's actually said in the movie, where hobbits seem to only care about food.
Yes.
That's all they live for, is food and good beer.
Yes. And it's also a nice tie-in, because the writers constantly were trying to figure out ways to tie in little bits from the book.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, at the very end of the books, when the hobbits go back and Merry and Pippin are like, bragging about how they are now the tallest hobbits to ever exist. Like, that is a sweet little detail from the book that, like, you do want to somehow include.
Yeah. Well, and including details from the book, them getting eaten by the tree is a reference to the first book.
Yeah, I love how they managed to incorporate Tom Bombadil's words.
Yeah, because they gave
Treebeard
his lines.
Yeah.
But it also reestablishes that Fangorn trees are much more alive than the trees we think of, and that the Ents really are their shepherds.
They actually are actively having to, like, beat off trees.
Yeah. I think there's a little better wording for that.
Yes.
A real Woody hard-on.
Yes.
And now our quartet arrives at Edoras in its golden hall.
A dingy golden hall.
I love Wormtongue in this bit.
I do too. He feels like the perfect slimy character who at very brief moments you're like, oh, but maybe.
We forgot to mention some of the inner fighting in this area.
Yes.
Because, what's his name? Carl Urban's character.
Yeah. King dude. Prince dude.
Eomir.
Yeah.
He is on to Wormtongue. Wormtongue gets him kicked out.
Yes.
And that's why they're on the written mark. And Wormtongue's trying to get Eomir.
And nothing screams manipulative bitch quite like shaving your eyebrows off and then putting potato flakes in your hair.
Yeah. To give him like a skin condition, and like just all his design is so good.
And I love how he did all that, and Peter Jackson was like, oh, this is great. Do you want to eat the potato flakes? And everyone, including him, was like, I will not be eating the potato flakes. That's nasty.
Well, and also at the same time, like, they do a good job of making these human allies very cohesive. Because he has a very Gollum-esque look to him.
Yes.
He feels slimy.
He does. But he has the exact same moral dilemma that Snape's character does. Where, like, from the get-go, from character design, you're like, I know actively you are a bad guy, but man, I pity you.
Just a little bit.
And the more you know about him and, like, his character design and how, like, there's brief moments where he does truly feel like he's trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, I get it. But both you and Snape, still creepy dudes.
Yeah.
Still doesn't mean what you're doing is right.
Yeah. Well,
you just get pity and hate.
And I think part of it, because when he gets thrown out a little bit later, he says, you're a man, you were a man, you were one of us once.
Yes.
So it shows, like, the corruption of words and just, like, the spreading of evil through tongue. Poison tongue.
Yes.
Also, he's always reminded me of the singer from My Chemical Romance.
Yeah, I can see it.
Just a little. I know they don't look anything alike, but when I was
it's the hair.
The hair and the very pasty white face.
Yeah.
But in a way, they even in the commentary they refer to him as like a mini Saruman.
Yes.
Where because Saruman is like Sauron and they don't leave their towers, they're having to send these bigger, badder guys out for them. And in a way, also like Gandalf becomes a new aide for the king. Mm-hmm. This is the part where the banners are rotting, because this is when Éowyn leaves out the front door and it rips off.
It's beautiful.
And then falls down into Aragorn's hand.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
I love it.
And I do love the disarming of the group when they're going in, because
I do too. There's too many sharp, pointy things.
Well, and also like Aragorn feels like a James Bond, like a parody James Bond character, where he's pulling knives out of everywhere.
Like every spot on him is armed. But it makes sense for a ranger.
Yeah, but also this part 2, I feel is important in establishing how badass everyone is. Gandalf, he's got his staff, and they're like, I told you to take the wizard's staff.
But also, it's so clever how he holds it. Like, it is, he sneaks that in.
Yeah. But it also shows that the other 3 are even more are just as capable without their swords.
I love how, especially Aragorn's character, when they start brawling with just fists, you can tell that this man has been in a bar fight.
Yeah.
Because he just is laying through punches. Yeah. Gimli's having the time of his life. Legolas is over here just dancing around, whereas Aragorn's just laying in fists.
Oh, man.
Gimli, tackles somebody at one point.
Well, I mean, what can you do when you're that height?
But at the same time, all 3 of them very much feel, with the exception of Legolas, who's he's been forced into a bar fight because he's hung around Aragorn too much.
Yeah.
But Aragorn and Gimli apparently enjoy bar fights.
Yeah, I can see that. And I also just love the dynamic of building this up, because Wormtongue, once confronted with actual force, he can't do shit.
Because it's not his own power. He's borrowing power.
Yeah, and he's also not a warrior. He's just a slimy, manipulative bastard.
Which is hilarious because the writers were kind of divided, because some of them felt like, oh, well, Gandalf is also just a slimy, manipulative bastard.
Yeah,
but
pretty much.
And Peter was like, no, he's not. I mean, I guess he is, but no, he's a good guy.
He has good intentions. He's manipulative, but with good intentions.
Yes, exactly.
Because he's trying to guide them to keep them alive, basically.
Yeah.
But I love this moment, too, because once he's dispelled Wormtongue's evil, the effects, the overlaying of decrepit old man into old man, but still powerful. Wonderfully done.
Yes.
And God.
And then you can it doesn't just end with the character change, where he through prosthetics changes back from old crusty dying blind man to younger king. Yeah. But you can also see it around the hall, where it's still decrepit, but the greens start to come back. The gold is shiny. Yeah. Yes. And it's subtle, because everything else is still falling apart. Yeah. But it's there.
Well, and also just because we've talked about how they intentionally chose hobbits to look like hobbits, elves to look like elves.
And kings to look like kings.
Bird Hill just has this level of Arthurian regalness to him.
He looks like a king. Yeah. Without any question. You're like, yes, that man is in fact a king.
Yeah. He kind of reminds me of, I'm at a part in Vinland Saga where the prince has changed his appearance slightly. And it's not even his appearance has changed, just his mannerisms have changed. And that's what happens with this.
It's not just perfect looks. The acting that he pulls to go through you can see the mental memory of him going back through, thinking about what he's not done for the last couple years. Yeah. And then the rage that comes through. Because it's so perfect.
Yeah, and here's the thing is he does kick Grima Wormtongue out. And that looks like it really hurts when he falls.
Oh, yeah, down some stone steps.
But he also gives him a chance at redemption. He's like, you could still fix this.
Yes.
You were one of us. This is that part where it's like, you do feel bad for Wormtongue. And I didn't do any real looking into like his backstory.
Yeah, you don't really need to.
But it's very much when you see Gollum being beaten around later on that you feel a little bit bad for him.
You feel like there was potential.
Yeah, exactly. And even the funeral, we really get that bit of building weight on the king. And like, now he's like, my line's over, basically, even though he technically has a daughter, or
he's adopted her.
Yeah, it's his niece.
But she would be next in line.
Yeah.
But sexism.
Well, yeah.
We can't have a perfectly capable woman leading nothing.
It's
Heaven forbid.
It's that stupid fucking line from A Christmas Prince.
Yes, it is.
I fucking hate that movie so much.
You're welcome.
But also, like, I think they mentioned, like, some of the stuff they used was based off Maori traditions for, like, the funerals.
Where the men hand over the body to the women.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And clean it and whatnot. And
they finally put him to rest.
Yep. Also, they noted that the flowers only grow on the graves.
Also, the flowers aren't real.
No, they're fake.
They're fake, but nice touch.
Yeah. And that's the level of, like, little detail they added. And now really the Rohan we see the world of men is really in danger, and Aragorn's getting ogled the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, cleans up nice.
Yes. Or no, doesn't clean up nice. He grimes up good.
He does grime up good.
Yeah.
Grimes up even better later.
Yes, very, very much so. And here, I know it's been a while, but this is the part where I want to talk about the architecture of Rohan, since we've been able to see quite a bit more of it.
Yes.
One, there's a shit ton of banners in the background to really show up, like, the division of the tribes and stuff. And it's like, okay, well, now we're all united in this hall, but we're still divided.
Yes.
That's why Gandalf ends up leaving later to go gather the
rest of
the
them.
Rohirrim.
Yeah.
Because he said, Eomer, we've gotten rid of him. He's not ever going to come back.
Yeah, like, I betrayed him. Why would he return?
Yeah, and even if we wanted to get him back, he's leagues away at this point.
Yeah, I mean, the man is literally on horseback.
Yeah, and it's been days. But first off, horse motifs.
Yes, everywhere.
Even the peaks of the roofs have horses.
Literally everywhere.
Rohan is... and
they are the crazy horse girl of Middle-earth.
Yeah, without being that horse girl.
Yes.
There's horses.
It feels... But the way they've done it feels like it has been part of their culture for so long.
Yeah.
Like, to the point where you don't need to know anything about the Rohan people, their culture, how their lives work. All you know is that they revolve around horses, and it works.
The sword hilts are horses.
Yes.
Their horses have horses on them. Their helmets have horses.
Their lives revolve around their horses.
Yes. And
it works.
Fits.
Yeah, it works.
Yeah. And to give inspiration, because everything in this movie did come from real life inspirations. It came from the 9th and 10th century Anglo-Saxon culture, whose buildings mainly consisted of heavy timber frames and thatched roofs.
The similarity is striking.
Very much so. But also, the design team wanted Rohan to be kind of like the English mythology, since previously mentioned, England doesn't really have a united origin story.
No, I mean, it was an island invaded constantly.
Yeah, but they combined Germanic designs with Celtic naturalistic motifs.
Yes. There's some good Stone Age stuff thrown in there.
Yeah, because even the Anglo-Saxons were invaders, which really makes the wild men the Celts.
Yeah.
And of note as well, there are a few dozen sites that mainly consist of churches and crosses, and the design team mentioned Sutton Hoo, which has the remains from the 7th century.
Yeah.
It has some of the most complete stuff, and they think they know who the king is, but also it's interesting just to see how often England was invaded through history. I mean,
constantly.
We have inklings that they were potentially invaded before history, or before written history. but we don't have 100% proof.
Yeah.
But first we had the Romans, then we had the Germanic people invading pretty early on. But then this was followed by the Vikings, the Normans, the Danish, and then the English proceeded to invade their neighbors once shit settled down.
Truthfully, if anyone was nearby, they invaded.
Yeah, pretty much. And this is one of the things that they do so seamlessly of blending so many different styles.
Yes.
And while the team said there aren't very many remnants of the Anglo-Saxon culture, there's a bit to that. There's older works, and most of them, like I said, are churches.
Yeah.
As is with a lot of older cultures. We do get to see the continuation of the Anglo-Saxon style in Viking architecture.
Yes.
So that's why we have this association with this kind of architecture being with the Vikings, even though it's not 100% Viking architecture.
I mean, if you're going to invade, you're going to end up with other people's shit.
And this location was one of the best they found, in my opinion.
It looks spectacular.
Sorry, real quick. I got a little bit ahead of myself. The thatched roof.
Yes.
New Zealand doesn't have a history of thatching, so they had to learn and do this all themselves. And it's done with a wheat thatching. But also of note, this is the most recent structure we will see in the entire series. Yes. Edoras...
Everything else was built before. Yeah,
Edoras was built in the latter portion of the Third Age, and if I remember right, Bag End is even older than Edoras. Bag End was built like in the early thousands of the Third Age.
Yeah.
So Bag End's been around for at least 1,000 years before Edoras.
The only thing you could argue that is newer is Bree.
Yeah, probably.
But only because Bree keeps getting knocked over by people's horses.
Probably. Yeah, I actually don't look when Bree was built.
But regardless, most of the main structure, there's a lot of like, people before us built this.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tear it down. Looks good. I'm going to take it.
Yeah. And I think, especially where they were able to get, Rohan is supposed to be a plane.
Yes.
But New Zealand doesn't have planes.
Yeah.
And what they ended up picking was, ended up being a natural wind tunnel.
Yes, it did.
And
it's very, very breezy.
Because it's on a protected piece of land, this was one of the very expensive sets to build.
Yep.
Because they had to dig up the earth,
save
the plants,
yep,
house them for over a year,
yep,
and replant them.
Yep.
And the New Zealand Army helped.
Which was very nice of them.
Yeah.
But honestly, choosing a wind tunnel ended up working in their favor. They've lived on the plane.
Yes.
Dude, windy as fuck.
Even windier in the wind tunnel.
Yeah.
I've been through Chicago. Those are shitty.
Yes. We did that to ourselves, though.
Yeah, we're dipshits.
I've lived on the plains for many a year. And, yeah, walking outside and just having your hair go fucking everywhere, that's accurate.
Yep.
And, like, it's not something that you would necessarily think of to add to your movie. Like, that is a detail level that only nature really can provide.
Well, and on top of that, because of where they chose, it was very difficult. So only the buildings at the top are real.
Yeah, everything else put in. Don't worry.
But they couldn't even, like, dig out for foundations.
No.
So, like, everything is pretty much just sitting up there, which is really, really dangerous.
Yeah, because, like, it could blow away.
Yeah.
It did blow away.
That's how protected a lot of New Zealand is.
Yes.
And so yeah, that's my brief little rant on the architecture of Rohan.
It's good. It's good.
There's so much detail. Even the common bullshit of it is so detailed.
Yes.
Like you look at the doors of the houses.
Yes.
And it feels church-like.
And the layout that they chose for the main hall, where it's just a big open hall, rooms pulled off to the side behind the column wings.
Yep.
Very traditional architecture. We see that a lot in the old longhouses.
I'm working on a tire shop that has that.
Yeah, like it's still brought back because it's so ingrained in like European styling.
Yeah, and I mean we even see it with the shotgun house.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, that's Rohan.
It is good.
And now we cut back to Isengard and Sauron leading. Learning what happened in Rohan. And we get we learn about the Ring of Balrog.
Yeah.
Where, so Gandalf, you found the heir of Numenor.
Yeah, which, only really solidifying what we already know.
Yeah. And with this, Rohan is being evacuated. We see Éomer being a strong warrior princess.
I do like this because up until this point, all of the women in Middle-earth, kind of useless.
Yeah, well,
as far as like a battle sense, we get a hint that maybe our elf princess could handle herself in battle, but Daddy won't let her.
Yeah, and well, it's the same with so Éomer and Éowyn are supposed to be like
similar
parallel characters,
yes,
just different races. The only one that we've seen that we know would be female character that would be powerful is Galadriel.
Yeah, but I don't think that woman counts.
No.
Lady is literally made of sunshine and death.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's...
This helps solidify not necessarily her as a character,
mm-hmm,
but just the culture
yes,
of the people. Because she explains that, like, oh no, all ladies can do this.
Yeah.
Like, this is just our people. Like, if the guys are all gone and someone invades, someone's got to protect the house.
Yeah, exactly. They're really living in the wilds,
yeah,
pretty much. Which isn't... Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, we don't really see any, like, farmlands.
No, it reminds me very much of, like, Mongolian society.
Yeah.
Where it's a lot more trade, we're very focused on the animal portion.
Mm.
And then, like, we're getting the rest of this from someone else.
They probably eat a lot of horse.
Probably. Or goat. I bet you there's goat.
Goat's good.
Goat is good.
But yeah, and detailing every stuff too. Like Theoden's armor is even more heavily detailed than everyone else's.
Yes.
And we later see Éomer's is a little bit more toned down version of his because one, they're royalty.
Yeah. I mean, you gotta be fancy.
But we also get a release of the wargs.
Yes.
A hint at what they are.
Cute, puggy pit bulls.
Yeah. Sauron releasing or spreading his power again because now he's lost his one use. And from here, we cut back to Frodo, Sam, and Gollum.
Doing their shit.
More rift between Frodo and Sam building.
Yeah, I mean, it is the climaxing of bitching Frodo.
Yeah, and Frodo being very trying to save Gollum because he sees himself in him.
Yeah, and like, I mean, there's depth to it all, but I feel like most people watching the movie don't care.
Not really.
Don't give a shit about Frodo.
Yeah, weirdly enough.
Nobody's favorite character in Lord of the Rings is Frodo.
I'm sure someone. I
know someone likes him.
I had rebuttal against when I said no one's favorite character is Superman.
Yeah.
Laufenstein's favorite character is Superman. I can't wait for him to hear that. But we now have a little cut with Gollum losing to Smeagol. Great can it be called a monologue?
Yes. Sure. Why not?
It's two personalities, though.
So? According to him, they are two different people.
Then it's not a monologue, it's a conversation.
Yeah.
Nice. But it also has a nice reference to, like, his Smeagol's origin without going too far. Where
it
it's
also, like,
murderer.
Yeah. I also like, though, that, like, the quick and, like, efficient switching really does tie in this hope that, like, he could be good.
Yeah. Well,
like, to the audience, it really, like, solidifies Frodo's belief in him.
Yeah, and it shows that Frodo's efforts are paying off in little ways.
Yeah.
And
he's still a slimy, gross man, but he's not the worst.
Yeah, and this scene was so impressive because this is really the first time we've seen full-on CGI just talking to CGI.
And it was, like, 2 minutes long.
Yeah, and drives the story, and he does it so well. And it's just a testament to how embodying Serkis was for his character.
Yes, he really created this character.
Yep. And now that Smeagol is no longer needing Gollum, and that's the thing, is Smeagol needed Gollum to survive.
Yeah.
It's very much, we see it in abuse cases where people's personalities split to help cope with.
Yeah. No, this is weirdly a wonderful depiction of splitting personality.
Yeah.
Even though it is in a fantasy world with a fantasy character.
Yeah. And
it's perfectly done.
And while he may be creepy, his manic, happy laughter is
yes,
off-putting, to say the least. And I completely understand why, like, Sam's like, what the fuck is wrong with you, man?
Yeah.
Because there's this weird little, like, Smeagol's demeanor towards Samwise was completely dependent on Gollum, because there's this weird little, like, odd rivalry played between them.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, we got the whole potatoes.
Yes.
Also, fun fact about the conies that Smeagol brought.
Mm-hmm.
They were pelts with gelatin Turkish Delight inside.
Oh, how nice.
So,
yum yum.
No special effects there.
Tasty.
Yeah. But we get see a little furthering of the mounting of the forces, where we see the elephants.
I love the design of the elephants.
And,
because they are both, yes, that's an elephant, and also, no, that is not an elephant.
Yeah, and also we have, like, the little bit of, like, bird chirping, where I'm thinking of it now, because I didn't pick up on it as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're in a land that's supposed to be, like, pretty void of life.
Yes.
Bird chirping would be weird.
It would be.
But also, there might be a little bit of a tie-in. I thought it was interesting that when the Roman Emperor Claudius arrived in Britain, he brought 38 war elephants.
Yes.
Which
would fuck some people up.
Yeah, which I'll talk a bit more about the war elephants in Return of the King when we actually see them.
As we should.
Yeah, because they get ambushed and everyone gets captured.
I also like that, and it wasn't the writers, it was one of the prop department. The blindfolds are full face blindfolds. Mm-hmm. And when they looked back on it, the writers and the directors were like, yeah, actually, why would you use a tiny scrap of cloth when you could just cover their whole head?
Yeah.
That makes so much more sense.
Yeah, it depersonalizes them.
Yeah, and it also, like, very much ensures that they're not going to see.
Oh, yeah. And so the other thing, too, is, like, the creature designs for Middle-earth, they were done in a scale that was to fit Middle-earth.
Yes.
And they were taken into consideration not to be our world scale, but be Middle-earth scale.
Exactly.
Sadly, they don't get to eat their soup either.
Oh.
And also the young man that were introduced, cool-ass eyes.
Oh, so cool.
But I do appreciate that he questions the wickedness of the men they just killed.
Yes.
And it's just an interesting aspect to bring up that, are these men really bad guys? I mean,
it's hard to know.
And that's it's brought up multiple times that, yeah, we saw them marching into Mordor earlier.
But, like, we don't know why.
Yeah.
We don't know the story behind that.
Yeah, they could be like the wild men who were betrayed.
Yeah. And this is them doing what's right for them.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's where the DVD cuts, so that's where we're cutting.
Yes.
Cliffhanger. But there's a few things that they really hone in. Mm-hmm. And I didn't talk about it when Saruman was giving his speech, but it's very reminiscent of that one very famous, like, Hitler speech. And we also saw that in Star Wars Episode 5.
It is the powerful leader amongst a large army.
Mm-hmm. And I always find it interesting how awful the actions of the Germans were during that era.
Yes.
But how much we continue to use that iconography as our...
It was a world, like, connecting moment of, like, understanding what an evil leader could look like.
Yeah. Well, and not even just that, just, like...
It, like, grounded it for a lot of people.
Yeah, just the way the speech is done, the banners and everything.
And I think for a lot of people, it was finally an opportunity to see how persuasive that evil could be.
Yes.
And how this fantasy could look.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just think it's fascinating just to see that
the parallel.
The parallel and the imagery being reused.
And it's one of those things that does, like, reinforce a lot of people when they are, like, nailing down this idea that, like, Lord of the Rings was a World War I and World War II, like, story.
Yeah.
It all is there partially because, like, it was so ingrained in its time. Yeah. Like, no one was free from it.
No, and it's still close enough to our collective conscious that...
It's still an iconography that, like, you would recognize today.
Immediately.
Like, not even, like, questioningly.
Yeah, like the First Order in Star Wars Episode 5, the moment they had that big speech pull up, they had the red banners with the logos at the top. I'm like, that is
Well, and even more subtly in different places that we've seen that exact same thing, where like in Lion King with Scar's speech in front of the hordes of hyenas marching, every adult who saw that went, oh,
goose-stepping hyenas.
Oh, okay, we went there.
Yeah.
Like, as a kid, you don't necessarily recognize it, but as an adult, like, it is an image that you cannot remove from your mind.
Yeah. And I'll bring it up real quick here as well. Just because I forgot to include it earlier on. Saruman, I do love his building of this character as well.
I do too.
Because we're really seeing that we saw him starting to tear down the forest around him in the first movie, but then he starts redoing it in more magnitude in this movie.
And in this movie, he feels like he is trying harder to be his own commander. Yeah. His own general.
And it really shows he's more after a result and not the method. Yes. And it also goes back, it makes the haphazardly made orcish architecture of Isengard, not even architecture, the orcish...
throw together.
Structures. Yes. Structures for machinery, basically.
Yes. The manufacturing.
Yeah. It fits quite well. Yeah. But, yeah. And, I mean, that's where we're going to leave off for the first part of our Two Towers episodes. Yes. So, but, anywho, this has been The Good, the Bad, and the Weird.
Thanks for listening.
Peace.